Bonjour à tous. Bonjour.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 17th edition of the INCYBER Forum here at the Grand Palais in Lille. My name is Julia Seeger. I'm a journalist at France 24, and I'm delighted to be able to welcome you and to present this event with my colleague Charlotte Kahn. Thank you, Julia.
2025 edition of the INCYBER Forum Europe here in Lille at the Grand Palais. Julia and I are delighted to welcome you for the next 3 days of intense discussions around cybersecurity and the future of Europe at Crossroads. And a word for all of you watching us online, welcome to, of course. You can interact with us using various tools that Julia will explain in a second, but we want to make sure that you know that we do think of you, and we will throughout the course of the next 3 days. The INCYBER Forum, since its creation, has been a place where experts, decision makers and digital stakeholders come together to build a safer future. We are expecting to welcome nearly 20,000 visitors over the course of the next few days, with representatives from nearly 100 different countries and working hand in hand with about 700 different partners. So very impressive numbers here, Julia.
Very much indeed. Nous allons effectivement être avec vous.
So we are going to be with you for 3 days with discussions on all topics related to zero trust. This concept, which is an absolute must in the world of cybersecurity, which is based on the principle of never trust, always verify. So it's totally redefined the security architecture and transformed our ways of addressing protection of personal data. But what is it operational reality? What does it change for businesses, for institutions, but also for individuals? And even more so at a time when distrust is at a very high level with regard to digital. So those are some of the questions that we are going to be discussing with our guests here on stage, with a program for this first day that you will see is already extremely rich.
Seeing Julia and I here on stage today, but also over the course of tomorrow and Thursday, of course. And once again, this year, we have the privilege of hearing from really high-level speakers from all over the world to share their expertise and their vision. So a few more words about the program for the next 3 days. To officially open this edition, in a very short while, we'll welcome the Général Vatin Augouard, founder of the INCYBER Forum, French Minister François-Noël Buffet, and David Van Veel, former Assistant Secretary General for Innovation and Cyber at NATO, and currently Minister of Justice in the Netherlands. Tomorrow, during the plenary session, after diving into the concept of zero trust that you talked about, Julia, we'll have some lighter entertainment, an interactive session dedicated to cybersecurity and the film industry. That's one not to miss. It promises to be very engaging. And tomorrow afternoon, we'll discuss the various ways we can scale up cybersecurity and how we can empower different types of organizations, but also everyday citizens with their own security. And lastly, on Thursday morning, we'll think about the right strategy to fight cyber criminals. So lots coming up, Julia.
Alors, juste peut-être pour compléter sur
All right, and perhaps just to follow on what you said about the program, today we'll also be welcoming Marie-Laure Denis, the president of the French Data Protection Authority, CNIL, and Max Frenz, the chairman of NOIB. Talking about the privacy shield. So should we expect a Schrems 3, which might be a question that you're asking yourself today. We will also have an exclusive interview with Catherine de Boll, the executive director of Europol, who will talk to us about the state of the threat of cybercrime.
So you will have noticed already that parts of the forum will be conducted in English and other parts in French, en français. But fear not, this is an entirely bilingual event and live translation is available. Hopefully you will have already equipped yourself with a headset for live translation. And if it's not the case, you will find them, I understand, by the side entrance over there. Okay, so if you need live translation, get your headsets from across the room.
Et peut-être un dernier message. Si vous voulez
Perhaps just one last message. If you want to participate in the discussions that are taking place here, you can do that on all our social media with the INCYBER hashtag, especially if you're here in the room. But even if you are with us remotely, don't hesitate to comment, to participate in the discussion. Now, without further ado, we have the great pleasure with Charlotte to start this 17th edition and to do that with General Vata Ogwar. Please welcome him on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you for being here with us once again. So many of you here in Lille. Thank you on behalf of the whole team that organizes this forum, that works year-round to organize this INCYBER forum, to meet your expectations, to ensure that none of your questions remains unanswered. There are many of you here from 90 countries. 90 countries are represented at this forum. And we can say that you come from all the continents where the sun rises and to where the sun sets. To tell you that the sun never sets on the INCYBER forum. I'd like to thank also not only the participants, but also the partners. I'd like to thank all those who are so loyal to the forum year after year, and also you who are here for the first time. Usually you come for the first time out of curiosity to find out what it's all about. And you come back because you truly believe in this. You're a dedicated and convinced follower. Now, each of the editions of the forum is different, but each of them, in fact, is similar to the previous editions. Why are there differences? Well, quite simply because there's a geopolitical context that can change. And I must say that this year we are particularly lucky because we have some major geopolitical events and turning points, and perhaps they're an opportunity for us. So far, we talked about a lot of different things. We didn't have specific ideas behind those concepts, but now we know if we don't stand together, we will not exist anymore. It's an existential issue for us. So geopolitical changes, technological developments. Look, 3 years ago, we would never have talked about artificial intelligence the way we're talking about it now. It is true that these new technologies will give rise to others, and I'm sure 5 or 10 years from now, we'll be talking about quantum and the vulnerabilities that are constantly increasing. And we know that with increased industrialization, with Vincent Sebel tomorrow from the Agency for Information Security, we will see how significant these threats are and how they are growing. The resemblance comes from the style of the event. Of course, from the very start, we wanted a specific style, a collective and collaborative state of mind. And I believe that this is very important. The INCYBER forum is first and foremost a state of mind. And we can sum it up in 3 words: trust, sharing and conviviality. Sharing is really part of the rules of the forum. We come to share knowledge, share concerns, questions, and to share also perhaps answers. That is really the core of the forum, where political issues are related to institutional issues, where everyone comes together, all the stakeholders share. What we want to do is make sure that we're no longer in a silo and that each of us can share wherever we're coming from. Conviviality, I think all you need to do is walk through the streets of Lille in the evening. You understand what that means, conviviality. Not only the streets of Lille at night, but in the forum here, there's a song in France that says that the people of the north of France have the sun in their hearts. And I believe that is really the truth. So sharing, conviviality, and the more trust, the word trust. Well, the word trust is in the Zero Trust title of our forum. It is the never trust, the lack of trust, which could give rise to trust afterwards. After we've taken a number of measures, then we can establish trust. Distrust, in fact, could give rise to trust. That is the whole paradox. And I'm sure that trust will be the watchword for the decades to come. You'll see we'll be saying it more and more, and you'll see in society, the more you say a word, the more it means that we have doubts, the more it means we need to do research, find out more. It seems to be something that is missing. We talk about trust, peace, friendship, but mostly we talked about it because there's not enough of it. So the watchword at the center of the decades to come, will be the word trust, because the world is increasingly complex, interconnected. We're in a world where artificial intelligence is developing with an impact which more often than not escapes our understanding. This artificial intelligence is recomposing our society in all its components, in particular in cybersecurity. This new world which is being opened to us is increasingly mysterious. It is structured by a code that is obscure, and at the same time, the code rules us. We have a physical reference system, but the digital space escapes that. It escapes the time and space. It is built on the infinitely small, the infinitely large, the infinitely fast. How can you perceive the nanometer? What is 340 billion IP addresses? I don't know what that is. I don't know how to represent that, and that's what's difficult. So in our society, we have increasingly relying on third parties. We need trusted third parties, trusted third payers. They can be individuals, they can be legal entities, they can have a face, they can have a company name. But today, our trust is often on the invisible, the imperceptible, the volatile, the opaque cloud, the mystery of algorithms, the transformation of our natural language in text, image, sound, and action. But we have never been as confronted with identifying what is true and what is false. We've never been so encouraged to a form of abandonment that comes from an acceptance of what we think is inexplicable because of a lack of transparency, of traceability. I have reasons not to trust using given services or applications, but it's so easy to use them. It's so fast. It's so quick. That is the trap. That is the major trap that is opening to us. We feel fragile. We are looking for techniques, procedures, organization to regain trust in a digital space, which we feel is escaping us and is transforming us into zombies, in a manner of speaking, slaves of thought. And also, you have to think about all those who want to shape our world without us, despite us, against us. And I think that that is one of the major issues of our time and the years to come. Yes, trust is the watchword that brings us together. We know that without trust, we will not be able to express our freedom of expression, our strategic autonomy. Trust is a requirement that concerns all the levels of the cyberspace, infrastructures, equipment, protocols, algorithms, the cognitive layer that has the data, that has the meaning. This trust cannot be ordered or decreed. It can only be built together. It means that we all need to stand together. International organizations, governments, regulations, solutions, cybersecurity experts, judges, investigators, cyber defense, whether it's civilian or military, prescribers, legal experts, teachers, philosophers, sociologists. Each of us, with our own talents and skills, can be part of this collective accountability, because there can be no trust without accountability, responsibility, and there can be no trust without solidarity. We are all, we can all stand, but we need to stand together. We stand as one, but we can all stand together. And if we stand together, then we will reach that trust relationship. Today, we are witnesses to a new and reformatted world. But we also have to be the stakeholders, the players. It's not an option. It's an absolute necessity. So let's stop just being observers of the consumerist or collective collectivist alternative that people want to impose on us. What we have to do is find another path, identify another way to create the conditions for a new digital deal with ambition, with enthusiasm, which will place the human factor at the heart of all our discussions, all the applications, all the constructions, all the digital solutions. And to do that, we have to stand together, we have to converge so that social sciences and hard sciences stand together. The third pathway is the path of respect, of trust. The onus is on us to establish that path, to identify and follow it. Year-round, we have to build a future which is a rebirth, not a chaos. We have the ability to do it. We have the commitment to do it. So we have to have the narrative, the discourse. And now we must come back to strategy. At the beginning, we have the word, and then we have action. The word is the scenario. Action is, let's go, action. And I think that is what is important. And I think that we need a strategic vision, even if it's difficult to look to the long-term future with cyber, because cyber is a short time. That is what I wanted to say to you in a few words. I've spoken too much, as I usually tend to do, so I can't see them looking at me telling me I should get finished now. So I'm going to leave the floor now to Guillaume Tissier and to Jean-Noël de Galzin, the president of Exatrust. Well, he needs no introduction. Guillaume Tissier, who is the great architect of this forum. You know, in prehistoric times, there is, I'm the one who does the drawing, and then we have Leonardo da Vinci. He's Leonardo da Vinci, and he is the one who created all this and developed all of this. And they will talk, and they will speak much better than I could about these themes. They are undeniably the best. You can trust me on this. Thank you. Thank you very much, General, for your opening address. And I will then ask the best to come up on stage so we can have a short discussion. Welcome. Thank you for being with us. Good afternoon. All right. I will just introduce them again in case you don't know who they are. Guillaume Tissier, who is the Director General of the INCYBER Forum, and Jean-Noël de Galzin, who is the President and Founder of Exatrust. Thank you for being here with us this afternoon. I'm going to start with this question, which is very simple, Guillaume Tissier, for you. You've decided to place the 17th edition of the forum, so the 2025 edition, under the title of Trust, despite the fact that we seem to be in an era of mistrust. So why did you choose trust as your theme? Hello, everybody, and delighted to be here for the 17th edition. So why did we choose this theme? Well, as the General was saying, when we talk a lot about a topic, it generally means that there is some difficulty on that topic. And I think that the first reason is the fact that we can see that cybersecurity is a means. We talk a lot about means, but it's a good thing to talk about the objective. Now, what is the objective? It's to create trust. One of the conditions for trust, trust in the digital technologies, but also trust through digital technologies, that's absolutely essential. It means that the place of digital technologies means that we need to create additional trust through these technologies. The second reason is that we're in a world that's increasingly operational and transactional. In the world we knew before, a world of relations, you know, emotions, shaking hands was enough to create trust. Whereas in this world, in today's world of transactions, it's more difficult. So the idea is to move from implied trust to explicit trust. That's the zero trust model. The third reason is that trust goes beyond cybersecurity. I said that cybersecurity was a condition for trust, but this notion goes way beyond that. There's a former Director General of the French agency ANSSI who said trust is what is left once you've done away with all or completed all the techniques for cybersecurity. So the idea is beyond the technical aspects. How do we use these measures, which are also legal measures, for example? How, from the analysis of context, can we make an objective assessment of something that is difficult to imply? And it goes beyond cybersecurity, and that's zero trust. It's the contextual analysis. If we bring together a great deal of information position, then you will be able to ensure, insofar as possible, there's always a part of uncertainty, of course, but we want to ensure that the person who is opposite us is indeed the person they claim to be. The fourth reason, and this is also a contextual element, is the geopolitical context. We chose the theme, well, before the latest political developments, in the United States. We know that the world there are fractures in the world, the digital world. There are also fractures or divides in this digital world. But there's an issue of trust of states amongst themselves, of trust of citizens in their elites, trust that we can have in ourselves, in our teaching institutions and in our allies and partners. So right now we're at a critical point in time where we have to review our alliances, and we thought that this theme was particularly suitable for this year. Thank you, Guillaume Tissier. So of course we're going to be talking about trust for the next 3 days of the forum. Jean-Noël de Galzin, trust is your core business at Hexatrust. So what is your approach to this topic? Is it the same? Do you share this idea that there can be no trust without cybersecurity? Yes. Thank you for this new edition. We are thrilled, of course, to be here. And trust starts with knowing who you're talking to. And Hexatrust it's very important for us at Hexatrust to be here, to be as close as possible to the INCYBER forum and to the European cyber and cloud community, to be able to really embody what we mean by French and European cybersecurity, and I hope inspire trust. Trust is trust in ourselves. I heard recently, perhaps you saw that, there was on the France 5 channel, there was a TV show with Nicolas Dufour, the CEO of BPI France, who said American digital possesses Europe totally, the cloud, the software. We cannot imagine that we'll have a European cloud tomorrow. It's impossible. The battle is already lost. So I would like to say, have confidence, have trust. The battle is beginning. We're at the beginning, and the battle is not lost. But we have to have confidence in ourselves, trust in our industry, because we are together. Hexatrust is here to show the face of the industry. There are other Hexatrusts in other countries, and we need to trust our industry. Then there's a second point, which I believe is extremely important, is the trust and confidence in our model. The model starts with the Thierry Breton has been doing in terms of the European shield and raising the level of resilience where cyber will play a key role. Thanks to cybersecurity, we'll have to raise the general level of resilience throughout Europe. And with our African partners, our partners in the Middle East, everywhere where nations want to be independent, our trust also relies on our capacity to protect and make the best use, enhance the value of our data. So we need to have a trust in a sovereign cloud, and we have space for a sovereign cloud. And finally, a confidence and trust in our economic model. How can we believe that today's model is still sustainable? So what we want is to mobilize everyone around this idea of trust, and we have a contribution. We arrived at this forum with a contribution. Tomorrow we'll come back to Zero Trust. We've presented a white paper on Zero Trust, which is the idea of embodying Zero Trust. But we have a new service, which is HexaDiag, which is an online service that we prepared with members of Hexatrust, with the help of consultants, to make to all SMEs, all local government authorities, so that they can have an easy tool to work with, to have a cyber diagnosis in less than 30 minutes, and then to receive recommendations for solutions to meet that need. So we are here to help. Thank you, Jean-Noël de Galzin. The General, in his opening speech, was talking about conviviality. He was talking about identity as well. So knowing who you're dealing with, which is very important. Now, the forum is the perfect place to meet all the players in the cyber ecosystem. So tell us a little bit more about the mission of the forum in that regard and how forum can reinforce trust. Well, I'd say that the forum is a tool. In the same way as the professional bodies, as the other events, we contribute to creating connections, to connecting people. So it's important, it's discussions among peers. There are public events, and there are also events, professional events, that were organized in Lille with CSIOs in the area of distribution who were impacted by data leaks, major data leaks in the previous months. We're also going to have the Web Security Summit with Web3 specialists, blockchain, smart contracts, and so on, and cybersecurity. Two worlds that don't really speak to each other that much, unfortunately, but who have to come together to create trust. We have the academic environment with research institutes. We have the CNRS, the CA. We have several research institutes here with skills, with competition, the Cyber Cup. So 250 people are taking part over 2 days with cybersecurity competitions. We have Invest in Cyber, which is a dedicated event to investment bankers, for example. And we also have the business connection as well. And the topic here is that in Europe, we have very fragmented markets still today. So it's a challenge for us and the internationalization of the forum to ensure that we can meet people here from different countries, not just from Europe, but in particular from Europe, because these ecosystems are quite fragmented. With the idea now of exporting the forum outside Europe, using the same ideas, but with local roots. We have a forum in Canada now for the last 4 years, with another edition in Canada. There's a forum in the US. The first edition will be in San Antonio, Texas, on the 17th and 18th of June of this year, 2025. And we're announcing it today at this forum. We will have an edition in Japan, the 3rd and 4th of December, 2025, with the idea that this way of working, bringing together a public-private ecosystem, all the stakeholders around this topic with an exhibition, a forum, allows us to create connections and to reinforce trust that is absolutely essential to tackle the lack of symmetry between attackers and defenders. The people who attack us cooperate amongst themselves. If we do not cooperate to defend ourselves, then they're going to have problems.
So the General talked about it before. Using the vocabulary, the semantics, and in your speech earlier, you used a war vocabulary, and the President also talked about the necessity to set up a war economy. So what does this mean for you, and particularly in terms of industrial policy, and what role should cybersecurity play into this? Well, I think it's a very serious question. We are not here to start a war, but to deliver a war effort. And I think, so I talked about the business model within our industry. I talked about the industrial policy. Here, the goal is really to double our efforts. We are already at war. We are fighting back. We are united. We're stronger together at HexaTrust. And we strongly believe that we need to fight against the European digital model that we are using today. I think the current model leads us to digital dependence and to digital bankruptcy. Nicolas Dufour, during the same interview I was talking about before, said that 120 billion euros are going to the US with everything that we are buying in the digital field. So we should contribute to that specific amount in social, economic policies, everything that really underpins our model as a society. So I strongly believe that we really need to rethink our purchasing and economic model, our investment model as well. So I think we should contribute to that war effort, but we need it to be based on sovereign French investments in Europe and in France. And I think this is key, essential for our business model. We're not talking about war only here. We're talking about our future, the future that we are shaping together. So recently, we've been thinking of making a loan of 450 million euros. So French people have to participate in that loan. And a few days ago, Microsoft also got a contract of 522 million euros with French education, the École Polytechnique. I'm not used to react to such comments, but here we're talking about 450 million euros. And are we going to sign 3 contracts with Microsoft? This is a question that I have in mind here. And when I'm saying that we are already at war, we are at war against the leakage of our own sovereignty and our business and digital models, economic models. That's why we should be responsible in what we do in the investments that are coming in the next years. And that's why it's up to us, and it's up to us for now to invest in our cloud strategies. We should do it now. We should invest in quantum computing, in the cloud, in software as well, all of the means that will enable us to reconquer our digital territories. I'm not saying that we should forget about Microsoft and US products. I'm just saying that if you are able to invest such amounts in Microsoft, then you could invest that money somewhere else. What could we do? Us, companies in the cyberspace, innovative startups, for 4 years with such amounts, we would be able to create a European industry. And this is what we should be able to do. That's the New Deal that the General talked about a few minutes ago. Thank you so much. There is a paradox in here, Europe. Legislation. So we are very proud of those legislations, but sometimes we also tend to criticize those legislations that are restricting investments and innovations, because to use our interests and our values, Europe regulated a lot. So Nice 2, we've talked about this before, and we're going to talk about this all along this seminar. We have the AI Act, we also have the DMA, the DSA for industrial policy, but we see the winds of deregulation blowing across the Atlantic. So do you think we've gone too far? What's your vision on this, Guillaume Tissier? I just wanted to interrupt. There is something that I've heard. I've heard that the White House, that Donald Trump was preparing a system that would increase the cost of all digital services by 25% if Europe would not remove the GDPR from the EU legislations. Do you know? Are you aware of that? No, of course, it's April's Fool. We no longer what to expect, you know. April's Fool, of course. Congratulations, yes. But it could be happening, right? So a few years ago, there was a law professor that was saying that the code was making the law. But who is voting today? The citizens, of course. And so it means that the law should frame the code as well. And so we are working in a space which is managed by private actors, but it's a public space as well. So we need to have regulations, legislations to preserve our values, our interests. It is key, and we tend to overlook that element. Have we gone too far? Well, maybe in the way we are applying those legislations, the way they've been designed. It's true that the US are deregulating everything. So yes, we have the AI Safety Act that has been revoked, but there are a lot of regulations, legislations. Mr. Sullivan, for example, who used to be the CISO of Uber and Facebook, has been condemned as well for data leaks. So companies are being blamed. There are legislations. It's just that they have another way of regulating the cyberspace. And it's true that we need to simplify our bureaucracy. But with NIS2, for example, if you are a company which is present in all European countries, having differences when it comes to the law is something that is going to be difficult to manage. So I think that we should preserve that capital, those regulations, especially when it comes to the industrial policies. And if there is a lobbying in Brussels, it means that it's bearing fruits. All right. So we need to improve things, that's for sure. But we should keep our legislations, even though the US is deregulating the cyberspace. So we have some minutes left before inviting our next speaker on stage, Mr. Desgazins. In Europe, there is a desire for a specific degree of strategic autonomy. So how does this play out in the digital world? How can we control our dependencies and our independencies, when it comes to technology? Because today we have a globalized value chains. Yes, that's true. But there are a lot of European technologies, and technologies also coming from our research labs. Our startups are used for AI, for example, which is one symbolic example of that. So it's true that we are buying the vast majority of our technical products from our allies, our American partners. Yes, 80% of our solutions are coming from outside of Europe. This is a lot. And here is what I would like to say. And if there is one key thing that you need to remember, is that we'll be able to build European sovereignty. And I'll let other speakers talk about this. But what I strongly believe, and last week I participated in the graduation ceremony of ACAA, and here's what I told the students. I think that everyone here in the room, everyone in Europe, when we are creating partnerships, when we are investing, when we are making decisions when it comes to buying things, when we are making decisions, we need to rely on one very easy principle, a principle that will enable us to retrieve our autonomy and our independence. We need to have diverse investments, diverse purchases, diverse solutions. We need to control and master our level of independence. Is it acceptable to have a piece of software, for example, the leader of Upscaler, for example, that is bought back by another company or an investment fund that would increase the prices by such an amount that it would, for example, put in peril all of the different companies in the cloud because we don't have any other alternative, or at least we don't know where they are? Is that normal? It's not. So I think that the idea of sovereignty is something that we'll have to work on. We'll have to be able to create it based on all of the things that we'll make together. And with Exadiag, we've decided to bring back cybersecurity to all fields with a trusted digital security system, services fields. We really want a cyber to be easy, to be useful, to improve the autonomy of everyone. And so we want it to be readable and accessible to everyone. This is our contributions to European autonomy when it comes to the digital and in cyberspace. And we'll talk about this in more detail tomorrow with you, Jean-Noël Degassien. Guillaume Tissier, to conclude very briefly. So with the European Champions Alliance, you have mapped the Europe's 800 cybersecurity vendors. So we have an ecosystem which is highly innovative and abundant as well. So what are we missing here if we are to have global and European champions? So it's true, we have an abundant ecosystem that is very diverse, covering all segments of the field, but we need the market as well. We need this European market, which is too theoretical today. It's difficult to sell our products outside of Europe. So first, we need to export our solutions. The US companies are not the only ones to be able to dominate this market. We can have European companies that could be considered as international companies. We need to work on the interoperability of our solutions. We need to make sure that they can work with different types of ecosystems. We need to be pragmatic here. We know that our CISOs are looking for platforms, for standardization systems, so it is essential to consolidate our solutions. And we also need to use investments. It is key. But Jean-Noël, you've talked about this before. So here are a few conditions that we need to implement for our companies to grow. So, yes, united we stand. We have 150 companies that need to be equipped here in Europe. So we need to make the right decisions, and we need to create a huge private-public partnership for our well-being, for our future, and our European sovereignty. And so you'll be able to visit our exhibition, for Exatrust, and to grow. We need our customers and we need our markets as well. Thank you, understood. Thank you so much to both of you, Jean-Guillaume Tissier and Jean-Noël Degazan. Thank you, it was extremely interesting. I now invite the General Vatin-Augouard so that he can introduce our new speaker. Thank you so much. Dear Minister, ladies and gentlemen, so, of course, we need to use the usual expressions of thanks when there is, of course, a Prime Minister joining a forum. And I'd like to say how much your presence is important for all the participants and the whole team that have worked on this event. To us, it's a very strong signal. Because having, you know, a representative of the state shows that we are part of a strategy, a national strategy, a European strategy, and a strategy that we really need to implement today. It's also a strong signal because our forum, with its specificities, its style, its state of mind, also reflects the state of mind of the state. It means that we have understood the public service and the service given to the public. And we see that cybersecurity is a strong challenge, which is extremely intense and growing. And with cybersecurity, we also have the fight against cybercrime. And the first forum focused on cybercrime. And we know that cybercrime is becoming the crime of the 21st century. Why? Because they use a two-fold migration, and rogue states have understood how it works. And so that's why we have cybercrime in the cyberspace. And that's the reason why we really need to have a strong alliance between all public actors, private actors, researchers, universities. The forum was created to break the silos, and I'm very happy and delighted on behalf of all the participants and the team to welcome you, Mr. Minister, and to give you the floor.
Monsieur le Premier ministre,
Mr. Prime Minister, François, Mr. the Prefect of the Region, Mr. General, the General Director of the INCYBER Forum, dear Presidents, ladies and gentlemen, Directors, Misters, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start my opening address by thanking your General for your invitation and to start the introduction of this forum, which is extremely important. This is the 17th edition of the INCYBER Forum, focusing today on the topic of trust. If I am here today, it's because I would like to share with you the program, the projects of the ministry. And you know here that we're talking about big challenges, but it's also to create a relationship based on trust. For the last few weeks, we've heard from a lot of people around the legal provisions for the fight against narco-traffic without having the possibility to exchange and to be honest with one another. So thank you very much. So with the State Minister, Bruno Retailleau, we have a clear mission, which is clear, which is very precise. The goal is to make sure that the law is respected, and of course, to do just that, we need to fight against criminals, and we also need to protect all of our citizens. And to fight against violence and crime, we've asked the prefects and the authorities to implement a security plan. For narco-trafficking, we've decided to get inspired from the fight against terrorism, and even though we're not talking about the same thing, we should get inspired from another. Yesterday in London was organized a meeting for ministers of Europe. On the agenda, the fight against narco-trafficking. And I think they passed the law this afternoon in the National Assembly. Our country is threatened, but not only, the whole continent is threatened. And they started doing just that, and the war is raging, and we can see that on a daily basis. We have gangs, for example, that are related to the drug trafficking, and it led to 263 gun shootings. Last year in Brussels, we had 296 shootings registered, and in France, in 2024, 110 people were killed. We have cities like Besançon, Poitiers, and Grenoble who are facing territory wars with the use of Kalashnikovs, for example. If the traffickers are growing, it's because they are relying on new technologies, which are evolving at a rapid pace. With Telegram, Snapchat, Telereads is hiring, for example, brokers that will then deliver cannabis and cocaine or synthesis drugs to consumers in the Île-de-France region. Via WhatsApps or Telegram, we have, for example, hitmen, for example, that are used in Marseille. We also have co-influencers on TikTok to connect criminals. It's because social media platforms and crypted messages are used by criminals that we have decided to support the intelligence services to access those platforms. And I know that this measure also disturbs you, and I know that some of you fear that it would lead to a bigger movement, and we hear your concerns and we understand your concerns. But here I want to repeat that the roadmap was not going against encryption or was not creating any backdoors. I want to repeat here that the goal was not to organize generalized surveillance, but to move together and to work with operators so that our authorities have the opportunity to fight against these existential threats, and more globally, to fight against organized crime. Because we know that drug traffickers are not the only ones using Darknet, for example. On Telegram and WhatsApp, in between 2014 and 2019, thousands of women and children have been sold by the Islamic State and the terrorists. On the Onion website, we have armed traffickers that are selling weapons and that are then sent over to their allies in internet boxes. And we know that criminals can now buy back, for example, ransomware and affiliates. The full crime ecosystem has now joined the cyberspace. So we have criminals, we have activists, that are relaying the wills of other nations to fight against ours. That's why we need to restore order and keep working on that. I'm saying that because it's not a new battle, it's just a new battlefield that we are joining. Because there is no physical or digital space that should escape the law. Criminals should never feel safe, should not feel like they could escape the law, especially on social media. Impunity should never be made possible for them. We know that crime is evolving, and that's why we've decided to launch new brigades. But since the 23rd of November 2023, the Ministry of the Interior decided to use a new commander for the cyberspace, the INCYBER, with the Ministry of the Interior, is in charge of defining a ministry strategy, and I'll talk about this in a few moments, to structure the partnerships and also to promote a prevention culture. To this date, we've also reorganized the operational services that are fighting on a daily basis against cyber criminality and cybercrime. The Anti-Cyber Crime Committee that was created thanks to the merger of the different offices for information systems and communication, and the Cyber Operation Coordinator. So the two have merged to increase its efficiency. It's been also connected to Pharos and Thésée, so two big important platforms. With this new organization, we've decided to fight against cybercrime in an ever stronger way, and we've been able to fight against the most sophisticated versions. With our Dutch colleagues, the OFAC agents have managed in December to dismantle Matrix, a crypted messaging system which was extremely elaborated and used by criminals involved in drug weapon trafficking throughout Europe. The people in charge of that system have been arrested. We have dozens of servers that have been out of service, and we've been able also to collect assets and thousands of euros. Even if that success is something that the general public is not aware of, there is something that was more visible. 2 months ago, David Belon, the founder of Ledger, specialized in cryptocurrency, and her wife were freed by our gendarmes that had managed to track within the cyberspace the crypto assets that were used as a ransom. With the brigades to fight against cybercrime, they are the new brigades I was talking about a few moments ago. So those brigades are being rolled out and will continue to be rolled out as long as we are rolling out this strategy. And I would like to talk about this strategy in a few details now. So at the heart of the strategy, we find, for example, awareness raising, prevention, and training. Awareness raising. Why? Because only a few of our citizens today are aware of the diversity of the threats that they are all exposed to, that we are all exposed to. Because we're talking about trafficking and crime. We also have crime that can, for example, attack all of us, for example, revenge porn. We need to raise awareness from a very early age, and that's why the Ministry of the Interior is currently participating in the Cactus operation that was launched by the Ministry of National Education, which aims at raising the alarm and explaining to teenagers what are the risks when it comes to phishing activities, and to talk to them about the different forms that can take, for example, the scams. This operation is also a good way for us to inform youngers of the threats that we have in the cyberspace. And we need to promote prevention because it's going to help the citizens in their digital lives and also inform the police if need be. Prevention, why? Because we need to make sure that the threats can be prevented. And with the NIS2 legislation that was adopted 2 months ago, we've been able to support 15,000 companies. And I know that some companies are worried when it comes to the costs that this compliance will require. I also take into account the fact that it's one additional legislation that the companies will have to deal with, and I understand how they feel. But I can tell you that the Ministry of the Interior will work together with the ANSSI, of course, a vital partner for us, so that we can organize concrete actions and support the entities that we consider to be critical and extremely important. But we know that prevention is not enough. But we need to give it a lot of strength and a lot of means if we want to prevent the threats as soon as we can and avoid all of the terrible consequences that we can experience. And then information. Why? Well, so that we can break the walls behind which the criminals are hiding. We need to understand how they were created, how they were built. And 3 years ago, we decided to give that mission to the Cyber Training Center coming from the Ministry of the Interior, located here in Lille. Here in Lille, we have our security officers being trained, but I also want to think together with the strategy to fight against cybercrime to make sure that those trainings are made accessible to other people, magistrates, for example, or private actors. We know that information is key, of course, and it will become even more key in the next few years. So beyond this race, there is another race. We are running around the clock, and it involves more than the safety of Europeans. It involves their future, it involves our future. And I'm talking here about the race to new technologies. I know that I'm talking here about experts of the topic, but the cyberspace is a space that we need to evolve in very cautiously to avoid all of its traps. I have described some of them already, but it's also a place where there are a lot of opportunities and where we are going to shape the world of tomorrow. And we need to be present in that space. We need to forget about our doubts, and this is what we are working on by making sure it is even more safe. So we can hear the concerns, the fears, and we understand those fears and concerns. But I know that we have to strengthen the protection need, and it is legitimate, of course. Today's concerns shouldn't be a problem tomorrow, because we are evolving in a fast-evolving world, and so if we are lagging behind, we are on the side, and Europe and France should be in the first row. Let's be honest with one another. The problem is that we are not in the first row for now. Who is the leader of DeepSeek, for example? What is the equivalent of the Stargate project here in Europe? When the US and China represent in between 20 to 25% of the patents in the field of AI, Europe countries are together only at 12%. So in the race to supercalculators, Europe has 4 HPCs in the top 500 ranking, but Japan and China have recently made a lot of developments in quantum computing. When one of a laboratory of one of our company, we need those companies to go against the limits of science in Europe. We're not talking about technology only here. We're not talking about economic imperatives. We're talking about anthropological challenges, because if tomorrow we were to become digital colonies of China or the US, then we wouldn't have any freedom. Or we would give up on our freedom. By accepting that we are dependent on other foreign infrastructure, there are opportunities. For example, I would like to talk about the heterogeneous data center treatment, but it's for our services only. I would like to remember that 85% of the data cloud is managed by foreign companies, and the majority of them are from the US. And so we are being weak. And this is a symptom. It goes against the competitiveness of our companies, and it goes also against our sense of innovation. And this is what Reagan said in the past. We need to tax everything that is moving, and we need to regulate everything that is moving, and we need to subsidize things that are not moving. We need to retrieve and recover our freedom to reshape our sovereignty, and today, and more than ever, the world in which we are evolving today imposes on us that reality. We need French people, but also Europeans, work on a daily basis on that sovereignty. We need also to create trust, the trust that we have in ourselves, in our ability to create a common future, to preserve our specific path, our relationship to digital technologies, because it's about the future, and we really need to focus and have confidence in ourselves as well. It's a will that we need to retrieve, and I think that this will is here, and I've been able to see it today, and this forum is a success, so that's good evidence of this. And that's why there are a lot of people joining this forum as well. We have students and entrepreneurs present, and so I would like to conclude by saying that in difficult moments, and the ones that we are going through today, the concerns that we have, the uncertainties and the change in our alliances and their consequences, it's an opportunity. We need to seize those opportunities. We need to take control of our future. And this afternoon, we have you have the companies, we have the public organizations as well. Let's be honest. And so we have here the opportunity for the weeks to come, for the months to come, to find that sovereignty, to master it more, to control it more, because we need it to be controlled. And maybe a European sovereignty that will be more sustainable, more durable, so that we can feel serene when it comes to the future that lies ahead for us or for the ones to come. Congratulations on your work. We need to keep working, and I think that the women and the men that are here today and that are participating in all of these projects are hopeful for all of our citizens and for their safety and their future. But anyway, thank you, everyone.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you very much for your address and for your call for sovereignty, renewed sovereignty here in Europe.
David Van Veel is former NATO's Assistant Secretary General for Hybrid and Cyber, and is currently serving as Minister of Justice and Security of the Dutch government. So over to you, Minister, and thanks for being with us today.
Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Minister, Honorable General, esteemed Director General, Excellencies, Ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor to stand before you here in Lyon, a city filled with great places and people. And one of these great places is the entrance to the Lille Zoo. And here you'll find a monument in honor to the 20,000 messenger pigeons who served and died during the First World War. And one of them, a pigeon called Le Vaillant, even posthumously received the Légion d'honneur for outstanding bravery during the Battle of Verdun. There's more. Even today, the French army still has a battalion of messenger pigeons. And as a former naval officer, I've known for a long time that France has one of the strongest, most advanced and most capable armies in the world. But the fact that you have around 200 pigeons sitting ready, just in case something truly disruptive happens, tells me that you are well prepared for anything. And that brings me to today. When it comes down to cybersecurity, I think we could all use some of this French attitude, because we really have to prepare for something truly disruptive. The last years and the last month have given us enough reasons to become more vigilant. Geopolitical tensions increasingly lead to cyber attacks. States like Russia and China are becoming more and more active in this field, while cyber criminals also continue to target our digital systems. And these attacks may be aimed at states and governments, but they also threaten NGOs and businesses, especially in critical sectors such as transport, finance, and energy. According to the American insurance business and broker, the average cost of a ransomware attack is now 2 million euros. And that's an average. Sometimes it's much, much higher. For a small company, such an attack could mean a bankruptcy. But not all incidents are attacks. Last year, for example, 8.5 million Windows devices stopped working after a security software update from company CrowdStrike failed. It disrupted hospitals, airlines, and many other organizations and businesses. It was not an attack, it was a mistake, but still a reason for concern. When it comes to our cybersecurity, we are under multiple threats. Our critical infrastructure, like roads, tunnels, and bridges, all depend on digital systems. Technological developments, such as quantum computers, could make our current digital security obsolete. And many countries, companies, and organizations are trying to hire the few available cyber specialists in the world. So one solution could be to pull the plug and go back to analog. That would be a huge mistake. Our societies have come a very, very long way from that IBM executive in the 1940s who estimated that the world would never need more than 5 computers. Today, there are microchips in almost everything, from pacemakers to cars to running shoes. And all this technology has changed our lives for the better. Digitalization in healthcare saves lives by helping to detect diseases faster and more accurately. Translation apps make it possible to travel to a country like Japan and communicate with everyone without speaking a word of Japanese. Video conferencing has revolutionized business travel, and the list goes on and on. So instead of going back, we have to go forward. We need to preserve the trust and the openness that enables us to do business and to stay connected, but in a secure and sustainable way. So how, would you ask? The answer, in my opinion, is threefold. We have to start with awareness. In the Netherlands, for example, we want cybersecurity and the seriousness of today's threat to be on everyone's mind. And we want everyone to contribute to keeping the Netherlands digitally secure. Knowing that we're all at risk is a first step. And knowing what to do when an incident occurs is the next step. So the second thing we need to do is to become resilient for cyber attacks is to have a plan. Everyone, government, businesses, and everyone in the public should be asking, what should I do, what should we do to make sure that our society continues to function when a cyber attack causes a power breakdown, when there's no internet, or when the lights go out. To minimize the impact of a disruption, good preparation is key. And in the Netherlands, we ask businesses to make sure that they know who to call in case of an attack, whether that's a cybersecurity company, the police, or the National Cybersecurity Center. Like we also ask people to have enough water, battery power, food and cash at home to make it through 72 hours, we urge everyone to think hard and make their own cybersecurity plan. And that brings me to the final thing that we need to become resilient, and that is action. Action to fight cyber criminals and to withstand attacks. For this, we need strength. And since you're much stronger when you join forces, we have to work together. France, for example, helpfully shared information about how you kept the Summer Olympics secure last year. And your best practices now help us in the Netherlands take action to host a safe and secure NATO summit coming June. I also expect a lot from our cooperation in Europe. The EU is investing heavily to scale and strengthen its defense system, including cybersecurity. And what's more, the EU Cyber Resilience Act will become effective within the next 2 years. These new rules protect consumers by ensuring that products that are made and sold in the EU meet our cybersecurity standards. And in the meantime, all of us in the EU are implementing the NIS2 directive. With these guidelines, we are asking governmental organizations and businesses to take appropriate action to become resilient to cyber attacks and to let us know when incidents happen so that we can help them and that we can learn from them. Pinning down the ever-changing field of cybersecurity in rules and regulations has been challenging, but I think that we've made great progress here in Europe. We also need to guide talented people in secondary and higher education, and that's why I'm glad that France and the Netherlands are kicking off the Young Talents Cybersecurity 2025 program here during this conference, offering young people the opportunity to work with cybersecurity experts and perhaps pursue a career in this field. By doing all these things and more, we make sure that people continue to trust digital products and services so that we can move forward and continue to change our lives for the better. In conclusion, I truly hope that you will all use this forum to meet new people, make connections, and prepare for something truly disruptive. And when you go home, I hope you will do your best to urge people to become more aware, make a plan, and take action, with or without the help of pigeons. Thank you and have a great conference.
Thank you very much, Minister Van Wiel, Justice and Security Minister of the Netherlands. Thank you very much indeed for that. We will take away, notably, the fact that we need to brace for the future for something truly disruptive. We'll also take away this sentence: cybersecurity is on everybody's mind. La cybersécurité doit être
must be in everybody's minds. And that is precisely what our next speaker is going to be saying at a time when cyber threats increasingly impact our organizations, but also our fellow citizens. It is increasingly necessary to make each of us an active stakeholder in cybersecurity to attempt to create global trust. Here in France, as the authority tasked with protecting private personal data, the CNIL, which is the French Data Protection Agency, is at the heart of this major challenge that is cybersecurity. So please welcome Marie-Laure Denis, who is the president of the French Data Protection Agency, CNIL.
Monsieur le Premier ministre, messieurs les ministres,
Mr. Prime Minister, Ministers, I'd like to thank General Marc Vatsin-Augoire, the founder of INCYBER, and Mr. Guillaume Tessier as the Director General, for inviting me to speak again today. The participation of our agency has been constant for the last 10 years. It began with the raised awareness of the Information Technology and Freedoms Law of 1978 of the need to protect data. This has been the core of our business and our missions for the last 50 years almost. And you know that in 2024 there were massive violations regarding data in France, and this is a constant challenge for us. That is why cybersecurity is an essential aspect of the strategic plan to 2028 for us, the CNIL, to ensure that each and every one of us is an actor of cybersecurity to create global trust. This ambition converges with the second part of the theme of this forum, beyond zero trust, trust for all. This wording, in fact, shows a contrast between two paradigms. The first, what the forum has called zero trust, which is a systematic mistrust, and the second, which is universal, implied, and inclusive trust. It's a dichotomy, and it shows the imperious need to reinforce our information systems against increasingly sophisticated threats. Today, the increased number of cyber attacks throughout the world and the multiplication of data violations on a large scale involves a risk of making this more commonplace, and we should never consider it to be commonplace. In fact, these attacks target our technical vulnerabilities in our systems and also the vulnerabilities and lack of knowledge of users regarding vulnerabilities. So they jeopardize not only the reputation of organizations, but also the private lives of individuals with serious consequences. So it's absolutely essential to transform our approach to cybersecurity. And cybersecurity must not be to the detriment of fundamental rights. Security and freedoms must be complementary objectives. And when we find that balance, we can try to build a more innovative and secure society. By promoting private life, privacy, we want to ensure more trust, and our new strategic plan identifies 4 priority areas in the current digital uses and challenges. The first is artificial intelligence, a technology for which every day we can measure the benefits while seeing the risks for privacy, security, and ethics. Integration of artificial intelligence in our work is the extension of a lot of work we've been doing over the last 2 years, with the objective of supporting an artificial intelligence that respects fundamental rights with responsible use. In 2024, published a number of data sheets to serve as guidance for developers of IA systems to ensure that they comply with the General Data Protection Regulation, with concrete solutions to inform users of the systems as well and facilitate the exercise of the rights that all of us hold. So there is ambivalent relationship between artificial intelligence and security. Artificial intelligence can contribute to industrializing attacks, but can also make it possible to detect them, to spot cyber attacks more easily. The second area of focus of our strategic plan is precisely cybersecurity. The continuous flow of data violations show that the use of many technologies and the interconnections multiply vulnerabilities. Cyber attacks are increasingly sophisticated. We have also observed that our actors in big business and small businesses, local government authorities, individuals, everyone is concerned. So we really have to measure these risks and identify suitable solutions and tools. With that in mind, we will continue to produce practical recommendation guides, like the one we have just published on the multi-factor authentication, with Fabien, who is a member of the college specifically tasked with the cybersecurity component. We're also going to increase our close cooperation with the INCYBER, the French National Cybersecurity Agency, and also with the specific prosecution service related to cybersecurity for the legal component. The third area of focus is excessive use of screens. The fact that for minor children, they are constantly exposed to digital technologies, and they can have access through that to inappropriate content, for example, or they can be targeted by attacks. And the use of their personal data aggravates their vulnerability online and can also represent a risk in terms of cybersecurity. So at our French Data Protection Agency, CNIL, we want to to create a safer digital environment for minors. So as a complement to this action, we are also working on two themes related to daily digital usage, which also involves security use as mobile applications and digital identity systems. Faced with increasing use of these applications, which allow the users to have, sensitive information, your contact, on your cell phone, you have all your whole life. You have geopositioning, you have all your contacts, you have health data. We have published recommendations to help professionals in designing systems that comply with the GDPR. So we are going to make sure that our recommendations have been taken into account. Finally, digital identity is a promising solution against growing cyber threats. It offers businesses and the public authorities a way to reinforce security online and digital trust as well. So we're going to make sure that the integration of these solutions is secure. And now I'm going to talk about zero trust and its consequences on fundamental freedoms. For example, on continuous verification. Well, based on continuous verification, this model is part of a proactive risk management approach. Considering each connection is potentially hostile, zero trust effectively reduces the attack surface because it's based on strong, robust mechanisms such as multi-factor authentication and micro-segmentation of the network, which makes it possible to have a more granular level of control on a network access. It can be particularly relevant for organizations in complex environments because zero trust aims to minimize the risk of data violation with a multi-layer granular security, and also that protects sensitive data through optimized management of access while reinforcing resilience. Zero trust can also provide an appropriate security response in modern work environments because we have an increasing use of clouds, third-party access. So this model proposes mechanisms for constant control and verification to reinforce data security. That being said, zero trust does not cater to all requirements because implementing this model is complex, in particular due to the architecture that it involves. In addition, zero trust raises significant concerns for individual freedoms and protection of privacy. The constant monitoring of users and their actions can be viewed as an increased surveillance on the part of employers. So this is an issue, for example, for the respect of private life and privacy at work. Constantly analyzing user data is also a challenge in terms of protection of personal data. So it seems absolutely essential to ensure that the development of this model respects all the provisions of the GDPR. Now, implementing zero trust means that we have to obtain and maintain the trust of users. Information on monitoring and control procedures is necessary for all the users, and also the reasons for these measures and the limits of the measures. So zero trust can offer advantages in terms of security, but we need to carefully assess its impact on privacy in particular. Now, to come back to what our agency, the CNIL, has learned from data breaches, May 2018, which was the date of implementation of the GDPR, and after 5 years in 2023, the assessment showed that 17,493 data breaches had been notified to the CNIL. Of course, this figure is probably below the reality, but it's increasing. The reports are increasing. And in 2024, there were 5,600 data breaches, and that represented a 21% increase compared to 2023. The figures also show that the private sector is at the origin of 2/3 2/3 of the statements made to the CNIL, and almost 40% of those are SMEs, so small firms. The origins of these data breaches are multiple. You have ransomware, phishing, representing 55% of cases, while 20% come from internal, in-house human error. Of course, some regions, Île-de-France, which is the Paris region, Hauts-de-France here in Lille, and Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes, the Lyon region, have the highest number of data breaches, but this shows that there are many also big corporate centers in those parts of France. But this emphasizes the importance of being constantly vigilant and of implementing proactive measures. In that regard, the NIS2 directive is going to reinforce obligations in terms of cybersecurity by imposing new regulations on approximately 15,000 entities in France. We will call for more responsibility and accountability of governing bodies in the implementation of cybersecurity measures and risk management. This new regulation will contribute to creating a more resilient digital environment by imposing cybersecurity standards that are higher and also a proactive approach to risks. We have to say this very clearly, and I think that all of us here, as you go through this forum, I think you all have the same analysis. The cyber maturity of the biggest entity should increase significantly, and I hope that the biggest corporations and entities will help the smaller ones and will lead them to do this. Too many SMEs are the victims of cyber attacks, and that leads to huge costs for them. That is why our protection agency, CNIL, is going to reinforce its awareness-raising efforts and its support efforts so that each and every one of us is an actor in cybersecurity. We have already made available many resources, such as the Blue Guide. It's not the Blue Guide you're thinking of, it's the Security Blue Guide, the data sheets on cloud services, or the recent recommendation that I've already mentioned on multi-factor authentication. I really encourage you to go and look at our website, where you have a lot of resources on cyber challenges and the way to protect ourselves better. The site has 12 million visits a year, and I think that you too will be able to find some interesting information there. I'd also like to emphasize that we want to ensure the proper implementation of the recommendations that we make by reinforcing our inspections, and we will be uncompromising with serious violations. There is often a succession of ordinary flaws that allows the attacker to get to the next step. So in fact, just with several small flaws, that can lead to a huge impact. So if you take only a few small measures, we think that we can avoid 80% of the data breaches that hit French companies last year. The evolution of these figures is a source of great concern. Half of the French population is concerned, exposed to campaigns, phishing campaigns, fraud, or misuse of their identity. 2025 must be the year in which we collectively take awareness of this issue. We collectively take it on board together. And I'll finish with this. Cybersecurity is no longer just a matter for IT experts. It concerns each and every one of us. Each individual has a crucial role to play in this collective fight. There again, looking at the recent data breaches, the role of individuals was often extremely important in the starting point of the attack. Often because they put their identifying, their login information on a fake site, or because a malware was on their computer, or because more seriously they accepted to sell their login information. That which is more serious. So based on this, we need to raise awareness among our employees in all our companies. We need to provide more training, and we need to work more with young generations. We need to give young generations the means to protect themselves, but also to educate the digital users of the future. And as Minister Buffet said, we have also taken part in the Cactus operation with several ministries. 3 million middle schoolers and high schoolers were invited to click on a link that was in in their own digital space, encouraging them to, free of charge, get cracked games, and they wanted to get all sorts of ways to be able to cheat at exams. Now, quite a few of them actually clicked on the link, and they were sent to the awareness message when they clicked on the link to understand that, no, this is not something to be done. So you understand that this is a long-term approach throughout our territory. You know that faced with these challenges, our agency, CNIL, will stand beside you, but we are humble and we know that we cannot do anything without you and without the contribution of each and every one of us. Thank you.
Marie-Laure Denis, the president of the CNIL, thank you very much indeed for that and for shedding light on the extent and the consequences that data breaches can have. Now, let me just go back on and give you the genesis of the data transfer saga. According to the GDPR, the transfer of personal data from Europe to another country can only happen on the basis of what we call an adequacy decision by the Commission. Now, 2 of those adequacy decisions regarding the United States were invalidated by the EU Court of Justice after Schrems I and Schrems II rulings. The court at the time deciding that the US did not meet privacy requirements under EU law. And that was mainly because of the extent of its surveillance programs. So the Biden administration then decided to sign an executive order to introduce the European notions of proportionality and necessity in the access of data from public authorities. And that finally led the Commission to accept the adequacy decision. But now, the Trump administration is thinking about revoking that executive order, just showing how much data protection mechanisms can be undermined by political changes. To tell us more about this data transfer saga, please welcome Max Schrems, the chairman of NOIB.
Thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm basically asked to speak a little bit about the whole data transfer saga and where all of this may end up. When we basically had this data transfer tool that was just explained, we already back then called it a bit of a house of cards, so who knows if that's really stable and what could potentially happen. This is the gift that basically was sent around our internal chat group after Trump came into office, because now we have this house of cards, but we also have an orange cat running around. And the big question is, what is the end result of this kind of situation now? Now, if you think about it, there could be a trade war between the EU and the US, or a specific member state. They now don't see the EU as one thing, but as individual countries. And that could, for example, massively increase the cost to even use a US provider, because there may be taxes, etc. So one of the biggest exports from the US to Europe is these services. One thing that came up now in the last couple of weeks also was discussions about, for example, an embargo against a member state. I was just recently speaking in Denmark, and they said, you know, we have this Greenland situation, and how about, for example, having an embargo? And that would mean that, for example, a US provider would have to suspend the services and basically have a digital shutdown, which for the US would be simple. Denmark has 6 million people, doesn't really matter. And if you just embargo that, all American companies would not allow to actually provide any services to that member state anymore. Nothing that may happen tomorrow, but just, I think 2 months ago I would have said unthinkable. Like after the last couple of weeks, we're getting into the territory where things like that suddenly become at least thinkable. Not saying that this will happen tomorrow. And what I would talk about mainly is a simple change in one single executive order. Ever since Trump, we now know what executive orders are. These are these wonderful things that are signed with a Sharpie. And almost all our data transfers rely on one of these executive orders. So to recap, basically, in the US, we do have these surveillance systems, typically called Upstream and PRISM, upstream backbone of the internet where the data is sucked up. PRISM is basically that the data comes directly from the US providers. Now, all of that is more than 10 years old. They're renamed, and much more is possible than the Snowden slides, which is this slide here, have disclosed. So we can expect that actually much more is happening than we originally thought. Under this law in the US, which is FISA 702, you only need 2 things. You need an electronic communication service provider, so a cloud provider, and you need foreign intelligence information. Now, for the GDPR people, this does not have to be personal data. This can also be business secrets, secrets of the government, any kind of information, very broad. And that goes so far as in the definitions, there's a lot of different definitions, but one of them is information that relates to the conduct of the foreign affairs of the US. So anything that relates to that, you can suck up and get out of these big US providers. There are certain criteria, but basically that is all there to separate American data from non-American data. So American data, anything that relates to US persons cannot be touched because that would be unconstitutional under the Fourth Amendment. But data of anybody abroad, not covered by the Fourth Amendment, so you can do whatever you want to do. The interesting thing here is we actually agree that surveillance to that extent as the US does it is unconstitutional, both sides of the Atlantic, just that the Constitution only applies to Americans in the US, while we have a human rights approach where it applies to everybody. Basically, they then get a directive to a service provider where they have to open up an API to get the data out. On the European side, ever since 1995, we basically have a general rule, which is this export prohibition of personal data. So you can't send data outside of the EU unless you can somehow guarantee that it's still protected once it goes outside. And we have different options of doing that, but basically what we do is that we expand GDPR rules to non-EU countries, and one of them is the option with adequacy decisions, Article 45. And one of the options that we used with the US is to say there is not really a Data Protection Act there, but we can contractually basically say you follow EU rules. So all of these data transfers instruments usually rely on a contractual pledge to say, I'm Microsoft and hereby I pledge I follow the following European rules. But that works well if there is nothing in the US, if there's just a vacuum. But the problem is that we have, as I mentioned, these surveillance laws. So you basically have this conflict of law situation. And we have that ever since the last couple of years, where the European side requires privacy, American side requires surveillance. And basically all these instruments die in between because, let's say you're Microsoft, Google, whoever, you sign that, but the law still says you have to give the data out. So this contract is basically null and void and not really relevant. This also, just as a PS, is interesting for a lot of the other member states. It used to, or a lot of the other non-member states. It used to be an issue that we mainly looked at the US. We now see the first cases where we also see more data transfers to China, for example, with the rise of certain Chinese apps. So suddenly this becomes interesting here as well, and obviously you have very similar situations there as well. If we look at the Court of Justice, so we had these cases that were mentioned before, the now called Schrems 1 and Schrems 2. I tried to call them Safe Harbor and Privacy Shield, but I didn't succeed. Now they're basically called after me. And basically in both cases, the Court of Justice made this proportionality assessment. So usually we have the proportionality between the fundamental right and the interest of the government to spy on someone for also legitimate reasons. And typically these proportionality assessments oftentimes came out in the red area up here. So that's basically saying, no, this goes too far, the government goes too far in surveillance. A typical example is so now I don't get the word, basically the mass surveillance of telecommunication surveillance that we had in Europe, where also the Court of Justice said you can't do it. Data retention is the word. So that was in the red area. But basically in these cases, when it comes to US surveillance, they said it's not just red, it's not just too much, it's actually a violation of the essence of your fundamental right, because it goes so far that it's even outside of this proportionality test, so to say. So it's quite interesting that the Court of Justice was actually very strong on these US surveillance situations. That didn't hold anybody back from having a third deal. So we basically had the Court of Justice twice telling the European Commission you can't do it. But, you know, why not try it a third time? And it was interesting that for about 1.5 years, there was not really a solution. When we asked in Brussels, the answer was the US is not moving. The Court of Justice basically says these are the rules. There is no compromise. Then shortly after Ukraine happened, we suddenly had these two people having coffee in Brussels, and suddenly there was a deal. And that was quite interesting, because what the lawyers weren't able to do for 1.5 years, suddenly these two people managed in an afternoon. I joked and was like, that's probably the reason why they're presidents and the lawyers are not, but suddenly we had a deal. And if you look at that deal, it's basically another huge stack of paper. And I'm oftentimes at legal conferences and ask people, evil as I am, first, you know, who has advised clients on the data transfer deal? All hands up. And I ask, the people who has read all the details of it and all the specific documents, all hands down. So we basically now even have lawyers that just don't read the details of these deals anymore and just approve it anyways. And that is where a lot of the trickery lies in these deals, is that no one really goes into the details of the actual text. I would just put out some specific elements to show you why maybe these data transfer situations are not as stable as we originally thought. First of all, as I mentioned, this is all based only on an executive order by Biden. So one of these documents telling anybody in the executive to not or do something. So it's not that they changed the law, they only have an internal order to limit the law, so to say. So what they do is that they have these executive orders, and what I forgot to mention is the new one is called 14086, so that's the current one, and that's the one that the European Commission usually held in the cameras and said, look at this wonderful new executive order. What they do not mention is that there has also been an executive order before, PPD 28, which is the one that Obama did. And this basically is more or less the same text. So they just reissued the executive order and didn't really explain to anybody that largely that's the same situation that we had before. What these executive orders do is that you have a very broad allowance under FISA 702. So you basically have a lot of options to surveil. And these executive orders are an order by the president to anybody in the executive to limit that, to not use all the possibilities you have under the law. So that's kind of the technique to limit US law, because in the US it's almost impossible to pass any law through Congress anymore. So you need to have these tools to somehow limit the law when it goes too far. Theoretically, that's doable. The problem with an executive order is, first of all, if you compare them, they're not really different. So, for example, the Biden one basically has the same limitations as the Obama one that the Court of Justice already didn't find good enough. There is slightly clearer language in some of that, but what's interesting is they, for example, also added reasons for mass surveillance. So, for example, they added health crisis, corona, and climate change as a reason for mass surveillance. So it's not just that this is better, but at parts it's also worse than the one before. And that is nothing that the European Commission put out in the press releases. What's also interesting, and that was mentioned before, and that's a big part that they took but that they were very proud of, was that they now added, instead of just necessary and proportionate. So I mentioned before the Court of Justice usually does this proportionality assessment, and they were very proud to suddenly have that in the US law. So suddenly the word proportionate is there, and if they would actually follow European proportionality principles, that would be great, that would solve the problem. The problem was that the US also said at the same time, we're still doing the same surveillance. So that cannot all be true. It cannot be proportionate in the US, not proportionate in the EU, and still be the same thing. And the solution to all of that was that if this is our proportionality assessment, that they basically added a different definition of proportionality. So they agreed on the word proportionate, but they disagreed on the meaning of it. And that was the magic trick to basically be able, oh, we have a deal because we agree on the word proportionate that the Court of Justice wants to hear. We just disagree on what it means. So that in the US version, it's basically coming out green. In the European version, it comes out red. And ta-da, that's the magic trick. If this is all fine and good, which the Commission still maintains, theoretically, one signature by Trump can kill it, because he can kill that executive order, and that is the baseline for all the other things that they built in the legal thing. So if they pull out the executive order, the whole thing collapses. If you look at how this is done in practice, it's one signature that is required to kill this whole data transfer deal that any use of Google, Microsoft, AWS is based on. So next day it would be legal to use them in Europe. And this one executive order can even be overturned secretly. So that's one of the most funny things. These executive orders can be changed with a secret executive order. So on paper, we still see the one that we think is there, but actually, in reality, there's another one that happened in the background. So I was there the first night Trump got into office, watching him until 1:30 in the morning in this big arena where he signed his first round of executive orders, because there was an executive order that would kill most Biden executive orders. So we're like, if he's now signing this number, basically usage of US cloud providers in Europe would be illegal midnight. And turned out he basically killed, I think, half of the executive orders of Biden, but this one not. But there was a review phase for 45 days for any national security security executive order. So we knew it got reviewed. We don't know what came out of the review yet. And that could actually be tomorrow another thing that he signs, and then it's done. So we have no clue how that's going. What could be an indication is there is this Project 2025, the big plan of government takeover, and there's a whole page just on this executive order and how Europeans force that on Americans and how terrible it is and how it should be killed. So it's quite interesting that of 200-something pages, that's one page, so 0.5% of this plan is killing this, which is quite interesting. So if there would be this one signature, all the cloud providers, all the software as a service things would pretty much be not legal the next day. If we think about enforcement, so far we saw that the authorities, the data protection authorities, typically do not enforce any of this. We had years or years where there were no data transfer deals, there wasn't any enforcement on that. But, for example, at the General Court, there was recently a case, Bindel versus the European Commission, for one IP address going to the US without a legal basis. That guy got 400 euros in damages, non-material damages. So if you multiply that and you say you have 1 million people that all want to have $400, then you have a serious lawsuit coming up here. So that could also be a possibility. Obviously, also the whole costs for experts, lawyers, all of that kind of stuff. So in the very short term, one of the options is that the Commission may kill this for various reasons, because they're also now gradually removing elements of the deal. We don't know how that's going. But again, the Court of Justice could kill it. Today there is actually the hearing in the Latome case, a French lawmaker that is challenging this as well. So we'll see how that comes out. And the other option right now is to host in Europe to basically avoid this whole circus. Not really a very, something I like, but it's kind of the option that you have right now. There are now more and more of these alternatives, so that's quite interesting. What I have to warn everybody about is the US is very much kind of promoting to just have the server in Europe, which generally does not change anything. US law also reaches into Europe. There are options that there is factual non-access by the US. That would help. So if they can prove that there is no factual access, that could actually work. Because under US law, if you have no possession, custody, control, so you're one of these big tech companies and say, I can't even touch it anymore, then you don't have to give it to the US government. So that could be an option to solve the situation. But so far, that's not done all too much. So a lot of these EU boundary products that are around, to be frank, if you look at them, it's pretty much a PR stunt, but it doesn't really have the technical background to actually do that. So very last point, after Trump, what could be the possible solutions? What we would need in the US is probably 20 judges to do proper approval of surveillance. That would be the cheapest option ever. Just hire a couple of judges and do it properly. Not likely to happen, so I think in the long run what would be interesting, at least among democratic countries, to think about something like a no-spy agreement. So that would be interesting, not for the next couple of years, not going to happen, but in the longer run that would be quite interesting. Very last point, just also think about all the non-democratic countries where probably even such an agreement would never really get you over the border. So that would be interesting how we deal with all of these members, with all of these countries in the world. Thanks. I hope that was a wild ride through all of these data transfer situations, and I hope you could take a little bit from that and it's somehow useful. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Max. It was indeed a wild ride. I said it, it's a saga. There's so many turns and twisted in this story. Maybe perhaps we just have a minute left, but one question, will there be a Schrems 3? I think everybody's wondering about this. Will there be another ruling at the EU Court of Justice?
There is an option for that. So far, to be frank, I think it's more likely that Trump is just going to kill it himself, and then there's no need for us to litigate anymore. Because just to give you an idea, the Schrems 2 litigation cost about 10 million euros, and I was personally liable for that. So there is a question of how much it makes sense to bring that up if potentially this collapses without anybody challenging it.
So maybe one last question. A lot of companies are in the room. They know that Trump can pull the plug at any time. That could have huge consequences on companies. What's your advice if he does indeed pull the plug for them to be able to navigate in these, very turbulent waters, I'd say?
I think it's really time for contingency planning for what is the other options, and especially if new projects are started, why do I have to kind of go through all this drama if there is alternatives that could solve it? I think it's also up for the European Commission to tell people a bit more, start getting prepared. This could actually get a wild ride. So far, the message was still, go to the US cloud, everything's good. I don't think that's appropriate message right now anymore. Unfortunately, I would love if everything would work.
Well, it's just confirming a lot of the messages that we've been hearing in the cybersecurity field. Thank you so much,
Thanks
Max Schrems. I think we can give him a warm round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, in a recent report by the European Union's police agency, Europol, authorities say that the blueprint of organized crime is being rewritten. No longer bound to traditional structures, criminal networks have adapted to a world led by global instability, digitalization, and emerging technologies. And from the creation of child sexual abuse material to money laundering through cryptocurrencies, advances like quantum computing and AI, for instance, are only making the issue worse. Let's take a deep dive into the state of organized cybercrime. Please welcome Europol's Executive Director, Catherine de Bolle. Hello and welcome.
Thank you.
Please have a seat.
Yes.
Sorry. Welcome, and thank you so much for being with us and accepting to answer all of our questions. Now, I just mentioned this report. Of course, everybody knows EU SOCTA. It's a report by Europol that comes out and is published every 4 years. And it's really the flagship report of Europol. It gives a comprehensive overview of the threats posed by organized crime in Europe. It identifies also key criminal activities. So tell us a little bit more about what it is exactly that you're witnessing on the ground today.
So thank you for having me here today. What we are witnessing on the ground today is that, in fact, what we see is that the nature of organized crime is changing. And the change is linked to the digital environment we are all active in. That's why we did call the report this year the changing DNA of organized crime. We see a double destabilization. We see the regular destabilization of organized crime group when they use violence, that it in fact has an impact on the trust of society in the rule of law, in the economic system. And now what we see is that organized crime groups, they really work together with hybrid threat actors. And that is making it a double destabilization fact, because we see that these threat actors, these hybrid threat actors, really have an impact on the internal security in the European Union. Then the second thing we see is the digital space is really having its impact on the way how organized crime groups organize their activities. So the digital domain makes sure that criminal activities can be concealed, that organized crime groups become stronger because the multiplication by AI is there, and the uses and the abuse of technology is helping them in setting up the criminal businesses. And then third, the acceleration by AI is very important. We see that all the crime areas are growing very fast, and it's all thanks to AI and other new technologies that are introduced in the world and that are abused by criminals.
So criminals have already harnessed AI.
Yes, indeed.
We're going to be talking about this throughout the plenary sessions here on stage. You know, the impact of very disruptive technologies like AI, but also like quantum computing. How is that changing the landscape? I mean, it's not here yet, but how could it change the landscapes in the years to come?
So what we see, for instance, by AI, we have a big case now that we investigated together with some member states, the case Cumberland. It's linked to child sexual abuse online. There we see that one person generated synthetic material, synthetic child abuse material, and did sell this on the World Wide Web in the digital environment, and he had a lot of clients. So what does it mean? It's from a legal perspective, is it against the law or isn't it against the law? And then from a police perspective, which child do you have to save? Because you have then generated AI children, and you do not always see the difference with the real child that is abused. So if you see the two videos, you have to make a choice as a law enforcement officer. Whom am I going to save? Because at the moment we don't have the right material and the right recognition systems to distinguish genuine material, so a real child that is abused, or a synthetic child that is abused. And we see this in all crime areas, this abuse of the new technology that is available. Also, for instance, in online frauds. Online frauds is really evolving at an epidemic pace, because with a simple AI tool, one person can reach thousands of people. And you have romance fraud. A lot of people still believe that they have to pay, and then they will find the love of their life. You have CEO fraud, where you abuse voice recognition systems to make sure that people transfer money to the partners they are asked to transfer money to. So you really see that these new technologies, they really make life of criminals easier. And what we did see during Corona is that criminal groups, they hired IT specialists and cyber specialists because they did not have the resources by their own. But what we see now is that the criminal networks, they have the capabilities to develop their own tools, their own AI tools, and they have enough specialists to develop the tools they can use within their criminal networks.
So what I'm understanding is also the fact that now attackers have harnessed these technologies. Defenders need to ramp up their understanding and their use also as defendants, right?
Yes.
What are we up against today, and what are some of the actions that can be taken to make sure that we stay ahead of the curve in this fight?
Yes, that's not an easy question, of course. First of all, we need to understand technology, and there we still have some steps to take. Also within the law enforcement community, we have already a lot of expertise and a lot of specialists, but we need to have more insights in what are the technological developments, how can they be used by criminals, and how can we make use of them. We also need the technical equipment from a law enforcement perspective to be sure that also we can use AI tools to process the data, because we have to deal on a daily basis with a lot of data when we investigate serious and organized crime, terrorism and cybercrime, and we do not always have the right tools, or we do not have the authorization to use the right tools, because now in the AI Act, everything that law enforcement wants to do is considered to be of high risk. So there are a lot of standards to meet. There where we say that in some areas, regular tools like a translation, for instance, is a regular tool. It has no impact, and it is not detrimental to the security of a citizen. So we should be able to do that. And also, I think because we really are confronted with a race against those who exploit the tools to make sure that their criminal business is profitable, against those who are trying to fight these criminal networks, that we really have a digital agenda for law enforcement and justice authorities. Because the only thing we want to do is to bring justice. It's not about mass surveillance. It's addressing the perpetrators, stopping and disrupting criminal networks, and bringing perpetrators before court. And for that we need evidence. For that we need technical tools, and we also need the right legal framework. And that is why it's so important to foresee that also for law enforcement authorities we have access to the data in the digital environment, and this is now a big issue.
Now, I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into this question of access to data. This is something that we're going to also be talking about on Thursday. Thursday, just so you know, it's an entire plenary session in the morning dedicated to the fight against cyber criminals. We'll be talking to General Lecouf about this, specifically about the report about the cybersecurity part of it. We just heard Max Schrems speak, and also Marie-Laure Denis just a few minutes ago about privacy, and you were just saying that you need access to data, but people are not trusting anymore of authorities for several reasons. But how do you balance that? How do you reconcile data privacy on one hand for citizens and access to data so that you as authorities can do your job on the ground?
Yes. in fact, what is the fundamental role of policing? The fundamental role of policing is keeping the public safe. That is our fundamental role. And to keep the public safe, we need to be able to bring perpetrators before court and to be sure that we have evidence so that they can be convicted by the justice authorities. What we see now is that because of the digital environment we have, criminals and terrorists and also cyber criminals, they exploit encryption and they exploit the digital platforms to evade justice. In fact, they have the possibility now to create safe places in the digital environment because they know that justice authorities and police authorities do not have access to the data that they want to hide in the criminal environment. So the creation of safe zones is a fact. It is not a story. It is a fact. It is happening at this moment. And it is weakening, in fact, the impact of justice and law enforcement authorities. And this leads d'office to weaker legal cases, and this can in the end erode the trust of the public in the authorities because we will not be able anymore to have huge convictions of people committing crime online or in the physical world, of bringing people before justice when they commit crimes. So it's about protecting the public, and to protect the public you have the two big issues, and the one big issue is the availability of data. That is not a problem anymore. There is enough data everywhere. The problem at the moment is for law enforcement authorities to have access to the data, so the accessibility of data. And that is why we advocate for a technical solution when we talk about encryption of data that entails privacy but also security. It's about a targeted approach, for criminal communication in transit. It's not about mass surveillance, and it's about a legal instrument we need to have access to this data, this targeted data we need for the communication. 50 years ago until now, you had the telecom sector. With the telecom sector and the police and the law enforcement and justice authorities, there was a good collaboration. When we had criminal cases and we needed access to data linked to criminal perpetrators, the telecom sector helped us in identifying this criminal communication. Now, in the digital space, with the over-the-top services, we do not have this guarantee anymore. And in fact, we have to back the tech companies to have access to data. Because we believe that there are solutions possible which bridge the need of law enforcement and the privacy of the individual. We ask for a targeted approach, we ask for a legal approach, and we do not have any issue with the logging system, for instance with blockchain, that is providing an overview of on which moment in time did the police or the justice authority have access to which data, so that it can be reconstructed. The only thing we want is bringing people before justice, so that the laws that are in place at the moment, criminal laws, that we can continue to enforce them. Because now at the moment we are becoming blind. We have this high-level expert working group that is making a lot of recommendations to the European institutions on how to try to solve this issue. But we really need to try to solve this issue because at the moment the risk is that we are becoming blind as law enforcement and justice authorities, and we will not be able to continue to do our work anymore. And it's not about weakening encryption. We want to have a strong encryption. It's about targeted access to data, lawful access to data under a judicial warrant and with a lot of safeguards in place. But please let us do our work.
So we'll keep on talking about lawful access to data.
Yes.
Once again on Thursday with General Lecouf. One last question briefly. As the Executive Director of Europol, what is it that keeps you up at night?
What keeps me out of my sleep at night is that at the moment I have the impression that our homes are becoming more dangerous than our streets, and that we are not capable anymore to keep our children safe.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Catherine de Boer. I think we can give her a warm round of applause. Thank you for coming and seeing us on the INCYBER Forum. Thank you.
Thank you.
Diego Braccioli, excusez-moi, est un envoyé spécial.
Diego Braccioli is a special envoy from the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and for international cybersecurity cooperation. He was not able to join us, but he wanted to give us a message. In his message, he shares his ideas about the challenges of cybersecurity and emphasizes the importance of international cooperation for a safer digital future. Let's hear from him now.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, dear friends, thank you very much. Today we are confronted with a new, totally original juncture in international relations. We see the convergence of cybersecurity and new technologies such as AI, quantum computing, brain-computer interface. This is a watershed moment. Now, the phenomenon is growing. It has been estimated that since 2022, cyber attacks have increased by 1,200%. If it were measured as a GDP of a nation, the total cost of cybersecurity, of cybercrime, which amounts to $10.3 trillion per year, would make it the third largest economy in the world. So this gives the dimension we are confronted with. Artificial intelligence is a new opportunity. It has pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages. To tackle this, we need to have a coordinated effort. That's why we have to intensify the international cooperation in this field. During the G7 presidency of Italy last year, we have had artificial intelligence at the center of our discussions, and we have decided to create a new cybersecurity group of the agencies dealing with this subject in cooperation with the ISESHIMA working group, which, as you know, is the pertinence of the Ministries of Foreign Affairs. We have quantum computing, again, incredible opportunities, but also big challenges. And we have a new dimension of technology, which is the brain-computer interface. Just imagine the possibility for hackers or cyber criminals to hack the neuro and the brains of individuals. This could create very big challenges for the future ahead. That's why we need increased international cooperation with all possible stakeholders, governments, but also private companies, research centers, startups, and the civil society. This is the reason why I believe the conference held in Lille is a very good opportunity to discuss about the opportunities given to us in the field of cybersecurity by technology in order to make these new powerful tools advance towards a more just and equitable world. Thank you very much.
Merci à tous d'être avec nous.
Thank you to you all for being with us for our next panel discussion, which is called Europe Under Pressure. The election of Donald Trump in November 2024 has emphasized geopolitical tensions, and especially transatlantic tensions, and has created a series of challenges for Europe: political, geopolitical, economic, and of course technological challenges. Today, more than ever before, Europe is confronted with its destiny. It has no choice but to react, to find room for maneuver, to defend its interests, and to conquer the strategic economy it's been aspiring to for so long. To discuss this, I would like to welcome a panel of experts, of leading experts, so please come and join me, and let's give them a round of applause. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here with us today. Just a brief presentation, introduction to each of our guests. So next to me, Jonathan Cohen, who's an American diplomat, who's a former US Deputy Representative to the United Nations, Yves Le Terme, who is the former Prime Minister of Belgium. We also have Tariq Cream, who is a visionary entrepreneur and thinker in European tech, Augustin de Romanet, President of Paris Europlace, and Gérard Araud, who is the former French ambassador to the UN and the United States. So thank you to you all for being with us this afternoon.
To kickstart this discussion with you, Ambassador Cohen, as a career diplomat, a non-political appointee, former US Deputy Representative to the United Nations. You cannot comment, obviously, on behalf of current or past US administrations. Nevertheless, this panel discussion is titled Europe Under Pressure. And what's undoubtedly a source of pressure for Europe today is a different relationship with this traditional ally of the United States. And the realization that it cannot rely on the US like it has in the past, militarily, geopolitically, I'm tempted to say, politically, and there are also economic tensions, of course. So could you maybe start by giving us a clearer view of how Europe is perceived currently in the US, and why and how the relationship has changed, and how it bodes for the future power structures across the globe?
Well, thank you for having me today, and let me start with repeating the disclaimer. I don't speak for the US administration or for its opponents, but I want to try and provide the best analysis I can of why we're seeing the dynamics that we are in the US-Europe relationship. I spent 35 years in the US Diplomatic Corps, and a large portion of that working on US-European relations. So I come to this with a lot of time spent trying to build up what I think is looking more like the old order. So why has that changed, and what's going on there? I would say, to start with, what we're seeing coming from America doesn't represent America as a whole. It represents this administration and principally the MAGA core and an outsized influence of tech leadership. And we can come back to that. The other thing is, this is not necessarily a forever shift. The administration has 4 years before the next presidential election, but less than 2 years before the next congressional elections, and things can change. As I said, there's no consensus among the US population to move away from Europe or have an adversarial approach to the relationship with Europe, but that is reflected in the leadership right now. There are reasons that we can dig into as to why that is the case. But in the interest of time, let me move on and say that you asked how Europe is viewed. And partly this is a caricature, but I would say that among the MAGA core and important parts of the US government, Europe is seen as having taken advantage of American generosity over the years, both in security and in trade. And as having set up structures and regulations and tax regimes that disadvantage US interests commercially. And socially, and in terms of norms, there's a perception that Europe has moved further to the left, while the US has moved further to the right. So in the normative value space, we've been moving apart. You've seen comments about Europe being, to caricature it, being a woke continent of freeloaders. And I think it's important to understand that the one thing that I think there is a consensus on among the US public is in defense spending, that there's a broadly shared sense that Europe has underspent on defense for many decades. To be in touch with the shifting power dynamics in the US, I think it's also important to understand that within the administration there are at least 3 different camps of foreign policy outlook. One is a more traditional hawkish conservative Republican internationalist camp. One is, let's call it a neo-isolationist, we need to take care of our business at home and the rest of the world is on its own camp. And the third is what I would call deal maker disruptors. And I think you can put the president and a number of the other people around him into that camp who want to shake up the playing board and see where the chips fall and see if they can get a better deal than the one that they had before.
Thank you very much for that. Some great discussion and starting points here to kickstart this conversation. First of all, is Europe being rather sentimental when really, clearly, from what you've said, it's all about the bottom line? That's how we perceived. And I guess that's a question for our next guest here. À présent, j'aimerais vous faire réagir, Monsieur l'ambassadeur Gérard.
So I'd like to ask the ambassador Gérard Haro, who was French ambassador to the United States, and of course we could spend a long time analyzing Trump, his administration. You have personal views that you've made abundantly clear on the US president, but to come back to the reaction of Europe with respect to US foreign policy. Now, the second Trump administration is not a very diplomatic approach in the traditional sense of the term, and rather unorthodox ideas, you know, concerning the Middle East, Panama, Canada, Greenland, and so on and so forth. So what are the implications in terms of security for Europe in a world, well, let's not forget this, where other powers such as Russia and China, for example, and increased populism also represent a danger? And what is the role that France could play in this new defense strategy, or European defense strategy? Well, I hope I have 6 hours to answer this question. Alas, you do not. All right, now, I just want to... I slightly disagree with Mr. Cohen, because I think that, in fact, that there is a long-term trend for the United States to disengage from Europe. I think that we should not overestimate the importance of Donald Trump. I remember the interview that President Obama gave in 2016, and he said that the future of the world will be decided between Los Angeles and New Delhi. And in the US, there's a strong feeling that the threat is in Asia. It's China. It's not Russia. To quote Senator Romney, you know, a service station with nuclear weapons. You know, Russia is a problem, but not a global threat. China is the global threat. And in addition to that, growth is between New Delhi and Los Angeles. We feel that in the eyes of the Americans in technological terms and economic terms, Europe is becoming like the outskirts of the world. And so the difference between a Democrat president and a Republican president, well, the Democrat president would probably have said, well, goodbye, good to know you, you know, see you, whereas in fact Trump has slammed the door on our fingers, and that hurts. But we are in the presence of a long-term trend, and we should not think that in 3 or 4 years it's going to go back to the way it was before, you know. So the Europeans today, you know, the situation we're in, but I'm saying it's not an academic issue. In fact, in 5 or 6 weeks, we're going to have questions that are going to come up, and that are going to be urgent questions, and that won't be the time to talk about strategic autonomy. And what it means is, what happens if Donald Trump abandons Ukraine, which is possible? What happens tomorrow to defend Estonia and Latvia? That's also possible. As you know, NATO rests on the credibility of the American guarantee, and not on knowing whether the US are or not, well, is or is not within the US. If tomorrow Putin says, will Donald Trump fight for Estonia? The answer is obvious, no. So another question for the Europeans. But this is a question that we can ask ourselves in the weeks to come. And the third question is the trade war, the commercial war. And the trade war is probably coming tomorrow. So for Europeans, we're not even looking at the long term. We're in a very short-term approach with very short-term issues. We are going to be faced with a tidal wave that is going to come and is going to lead us to react. And we're going to have to react. And we're going to have to react in particularly difficult conditions, because we do not have all the cards in hand. And in particular from a military standpoint. We can see the President of the French Republic, the British Prime Minister in particular, who are trying to lead a European reaction because our German friends are still impacted by the need to create a coalition at this point in time. So this is a very short-term problem coming up, and it's going to require Europeans to make short-term decisions. You know, we can talk about the increase of defense budgets, but experts will tell you, but that won't have any effect before 5 years from now. The fact that we could constitute armed forces or build up armed forces that are proportional to the threat, the constitution or the creation of a European defense. We do not have a European military organization. The European Union does not have the resources to undertake large-scale military operations. We have NATO. Is it possible to Europeanize NATO, for example? But there are lots of short-term, medium-term questions and short-term questions for Europeans, and they are quite drastic and immediate. And perhaps that will finally lead Europeans to make decisions. And last point, you were saying in the introduction that Europeans were dreaming of strategic autonomy for a long time. Absolutely not. The Europeans did not want strategic autonomy. The Europeans were quite happy to be under American protection. I can tell you, as a French diplomat, I heard Mr. Seguin talking about strategic autonomy while all our European partners were saying NATO, American protection, sorry. So maybe the world has changed. Maybe now, as a French diplomat, I can say, I told you so. And maybe in France, with our Gaullist tradition, we had other ambitions regarding our sovereignty, our military sovereignty at any rate. You raised something very important, Ms. Tarot, the dichotomy that certainly exists here in Europe. In Europe in today's world is a middle power rather than the great power we are still hoping to be, I guess. Mr. Terme, you were the head of Belgium as a prime minister, but also at the head of the Council of the European Union during the Belgian presidency to talk about this crisis of trust in Europe, which is the theme of this year's forum, trust, with distrust of citizens with respect to their institutions, some mistrust between member states, but also some existential doubts about the abilities, capabilities of Europe to create its own destiny. So according to you, what are the solutions, perhaps, to regain that trust, restore the legitimacy of the European project, and ensure that Europe is no longer just a spectator in a moving world, which is often moving without us? And how should Europe now at the crossroads react? Well, to paraphrase the ambassador, we don't need 6 hours, but at least 6 months to answer your question. First of all, regarding the question, I'm not certain that the European authorities are an exception regarding the issue of distrust. I think, against those who govern in general, even at national level, there's mistrust of our fellow citizens. And I think what we are experiencing in Europe right now is that for more than centuries, in fact, Europe was deciding for the world, and now the world is deciding for Europe. And this change is really that the citizens have realized this in a very short space of time, just a few weeks. In the space of just 1 week, what has happened is what can happen in a decade. And my apologies, I'm not a French speaker, says the minister, so I hope I'm expressing myself clearly. But we are faced with this situation, this shock, and we have to react to that. And what I'm afraid of is not so much the distrust or even the mistrust. And in the past, and François Fillon was here, we saw that in crisis moments, every time in the moments of crisis, Europe, the European Union, European leadership, European construction succeed in speeding up the processes and finding answers. Financial, banking crisis, COVID, So there is a hope that now also we will be able to take giant leaps confronted with the shocks that I've just described. But the point is that, as the ambassador said, in the framework of the crisis, Mr. de Roumane was there too, in the framework of, well, the banking crisis, the financial crisis, the risk was immediate, but the answers also had an immediate impact. In COVID, in mask production, we had solutions that were going to have immediate impact with the masks, for example. But here, for military, it's a long-term approach. And I think that the average citizen, but after all, who am I to say what the average citizen thinks of European construction? But I believe that the average citizen in Europe believes
for a very long time big on small and small on big, and they expect Europe to be big on big and small on small. Donc je crois que l'intégration européenne c'est un des développements.
So I believe that the European integration, concomitantly with China, who is back now in history. I think the history of Europe is extremely impressive since the Second World War, but this integration is done step by step based on very complex decision-making, 27 countries right now. It will remain complex, so we have to have the hope that on 3 or 4 essential areas, essential aspects, that Europe can deliver decisions. And that is, well, those essential areas are security, with the variable geometry among the countries around the table. There's economics, and I would add that in terms of governance and the societal model, we need to be able to make decisions. So, to sum up and answer to your question, first of all, I'm not sure that the European Union has more issues with trust than other levels of power, national and regional levels as well. I think that Europe has a capacity to confront crisis, but a footnote to that is that the military time is a long time. Last but not least, I think that Europe should focus on the essential, leave other things aside, deliver real decisions and rebuild trust with our citizens thanks to effective decision-making and bringing concrete solutions, security, economics, governance, and the defense of our societal model. Thank you. So now, very concretely, this question of investments in security with you, Augustin de Roumane, in a context of disengagement, which will be temporary or not on the part of the United States, Europe needs to reinforce, to develop its defense industry and its independence, of course. Recently, during the European summit, Emmanuel Macron asked for a European preference regarding the purchase of military, procurement of military equipment. Because our dependence is between 60 and 80% of European defense procurement, which is done with European companies. So what about the Buy European Act? How could we make European public tenders play a strategic role, and how can we refocus our European capital and private savings, a lot of private savings on this continent, how can we refocus that on industrial, ecological priorities, and also our digital priorities, of course? I have 17 questions, and I need 17 hours, therefore. Now, to come back to what Gérard was saying, it's true that it comes from a long time ago. I remember before the election of Donald Trump 6 months ago, Larry Summers came to make a short presentation in Paris, and he said, what do the Americans think of Europe? Well, they think that Europeans spend 400 billion for their defense. The US, 900 billion. The difference is 500 billion, and that's what Europeans are using to subsidize Airbus. So we don't want Europeans to compete with us on the savings they achieve on defense in order to subsidize Airbus. And you know, we're in a global competition for reindustrialization. You know, the Americans also thought that they could leave manufacturing industries to the other parts of the world, but now the US also want to reindustrialize. That is why the act signed by Joe Biden was also the beginning of relocalizing manufacturing in the US. So this question about European autonomy is now crucial again, even more so given that we have not solved all our contradictions. Let's take Denmark. Earlier, our speaker gave the example of Denmark as a country in which you could cut off all the services provided by GAFA. And it's an editorial by the SIGREF where you will see this month there's a short fable. What would happen if you cut off Google, Meta, Microsoft, and so on in Denmark? The country cannot live anymore. And despite that, Denmark, who is being told to give up Greenland, wants to buy American systems. Whereas in Europe, we have two other systems, we have two other aircraft, Rafale and Eurofighter. So the first question we need to ask ourselves, to what extent does each country feel responsible for an autonomous European industry? Second point, it will take time. In Europe, and more particularly in France, which has the most powerful defense industry, we make very perfected weapons that take a long time to manufacture. The question is, we need to make lots of weapons at lower cost, ammunition, powder, artillery. It's going to take 3 or 4 years, at least, to rebuild an armaments, a weapons industry which is scattered. Because for France, you've heard about this new acronym, which is BITD, which the industrial and technical defense base, we have 4,000 companies in that, and some of them are very small. So we need to find reasonable relationships between contractors, subcontractors, and second-tier subcontractors to recreate this mass production defense industry, recreate weapons that can hold for a very long time on the battlefield. This is what Jad was saying about Estonia and Latvia. The question can come up tomorrow. So we really need to get ready. I'm not going to be too long in my answer. But I could talk about the major meetings that took place in France last week on financing this industrial defense space. But it goes very far in the call to public opinion, because our defense minister has referred to 500 euro units to call on the public to support SMEs in the defense sector. And we know that we need, in own funds, we need at least 3 billion to support the reinvestment that is necessary to start up this whole defense industry again. So I believe that the final question is the issue of sovereignty. You know that Americans have a system called ITAR, which is a regulation which compels American industries not to reveal the secrets of their weapons without the permission of the US government. So when you buy an American weapon, you are not independent. It is the case of the United Kingdom with the nuclear weapon. It could be blocked at any time in its functioning and operation by the US. So this is a very long-term challenge. And it's related to the raised awareness in Europe of the need for financial autonomy. I might come back to that a little bit later if you'd like me to, but now, in the fight among empires between China and the US, and I share the view of those who believe that Russia is not a topic for the US. In fact, they're concerned about China rather than Russia. But Europe, in this context, existentially needs to work around this defense industry, and that's an ex post justification to all those who had doubts about the euro. And, you know, I worked a lot on the euro and the construction of the euro. I heard a lot of doubts, people saying, you know, we created the euro to have a common financial policy, to have a common budget requirements. So wasn't the euro maybe a mistake? Well, no, I don't think so. I think the euro is beginning of the awareness that in the war of empires, we need to be independent, not only financially, but also militarily. And there is another empire which has emerged, which is American technology. Tarek, I'm just turning to you because you have an interesting profile. You're an entrepreneur and a philosopher of tech. You're also the founder of NetVibes and Jolly Cloud. You're a former vice president of the National Digital Council. You also have a newsletter called cybernetica.fr, which explores the challenges of sovereignty, for digital resilience, and also, and that's very interesting, and that's why you're with us today, the technological challenges and how they're involved in current geopolitics. So quickly, why am I talking about this empire? Because we can see in the US quite clearly, we can see a technological vision which is extremely different. Technology has become an almost autonomous form of power, with major technologists, if you can call them that, like Musk, who are taking over a huge political power, while we in Europe are very far from that vision. So why are we there? What's the issue? Why is there a form of a drop in our technology compared to the US, but also compared to China, despite the fact that we have talents here in Europe? So how can we work to make progress on this technical sovereignty issue?
Well, first of all, in Europe we have a lot of talents, of course, engineers. And the two foundations of the Internet, web and Linux, have been created in Europe. Some time ago, one mobile phone out of three was produced in France. We were dominating a lot of fields, and there are three key dates that we need to take into account. The first one is 1993. I think when Clinton started the Super Information Highway project, we didn't realize it was the new digital industrial revolution. They have created an exceptional economy around the internet, and it was giving them a lot of power. In Europe, what was the priority back in 1993? Clean diazole. So we've made choices. Then, what is interesting is that I have worked in the Silicon Valley and in France, in Europe. I have tried to set up teams in the Silicon Valley and in France. And there is one thing that we don't really understand in Europe. Technology is like the film industry. It's about talents. All of the people that I've met with in the Silicon Valley are unique people with unique visions, with unique teams. And all of the extraordinary work that have been carried out in the Silicon Valley was to put those teams together to create giants. And that there is a second key date, 2007, when the first iPhone and the cloud were created. And without even realizing it, the US started dominating us in our daily life, because we all have a phone, for example, with our pictures stored on the cloud or on the Google Drive. And so it means that there was a strong economy that was built at the time. And the US know how to scale up. All the startups that we are talking about, it was just two people in a garage, and then they became big companies, giants. So they had the expertise, because we've been able to choose the right people. We gave them the right environment, and they were supported by different types of administrations. And then we could think of a third date, the beginning of the war in Ukraine. This is when we started realizing that this digital space was also political. And this is what the US realized when Google was hacked by China. We were investing a lot in China, we were providing them with a lot of technologies, but they had an opponent. China did what the Europe didn't do. They became independent. Because of the sanctions, China had to produce their own products with DeepSeek, for example, the competitor of OpenAI. They are excellent. And now they are able to do what ASML does with chips. We're talking about new generation chips, and the war in Ukraine also showed us that we're talking about a technological war. So we talked about weapons before, and if you don't have the right digital infrastructure, if you have the right weapons, they won't be useful. You won't be able to use them. So it means that we've been lagging behind, and we need to understand that the problem is of a technological nature. We need engineers to be at the center of the project. So before talking about new solutions to focus on tech in Europe, I would like Mr. Ambassador arrow, I would like to go back to our technological dependence. And the technology is used as a political lever. That's especially the case with the new Trump administration. We know that the US administrators use the threats of the Starlink, for example, system. So we have value chains that remain interdependent and globalized. Chips, for example, in Europe, we are lagging behind compared with our American friends and Chinese friends. So what is your vision? How can we build this technological independence? And before that, I would like to go back to something that French people do not really understand, because it's hard to understand. As French people, you think that the Rafale is a European plane. But no, it's a French aircraft. For our European partners, and up until the election of Donald Trump, the Europeans thought that safety was localized on the continent. So it means that we should not underestimate the attachment, the feeling of attachment from Europeans to a world that was from Vancouver to Warsaw, sorry. And so when French people were saying, wow, Belgian people are buying R16, yes, but for all of the other European countries, it was their normal life. That was the safety, security space. This is what explains, in some part, the difficulties that we are facing today. We need to understand that for all Europeans, what is happening is a trauma. It means that the vision of their own security, of their own civilization, is put into question because of Donald Trump. So in Eastern Europe, civilization really matters. When I listened to the first inauguration speech of Donald Trump back in 2017, I was in New York, in Washington at the time, and my German colleague was crying because the Germany that we know today has been created by the US. They are attached to the US. They have a feeling of acknowledgement towards the US. And in Western Europe and in Eastern Europe, Europeans that are being threatened by Russia rely on the US for their safety. You're not going to tell the Polish people, please trust the UK and France. It's the same for Czech people. They know what happened in 1938. So it means that people are panicking. And as Augustin said before, not only Danish people are buying F-35, but German people will buy F-35 equipment. And so it means that behind this, there is hope for a lot of Europeans. They have some hope. A lot of Europeans really hope that, and you know, Donald Trump joined power 2 months ago, they are hopeful that we'll have the same situation that the one that we had right after the first mandate of Trump. Europeans would, for example, spend 100 billion euros more for their defense. And it was enough for Donald Trump at the time, and for a lot of Europeans today, this is the same situation. They have the same state of mind. They still hope that it's not going to be that critical. When it comes to technology, so we had the ITAR model. As an ambassador, several times I had to visit the Department of State to try and make sure that French equipment could be sold to one country or the other. And very often the US said no. And so our product could not be sold to a customer, and so the customer would buy the next morning an American product, of course. You need to realize that we are questioning 70 years of thinking, of organization, everything disrupted, because the human never imagined that their safety would be disassociated from the US. So before talking about technical solutions that will take years, that will require a lot of financial means as well. Before that, we need a strong political will, a united one. And I'm very sorry, but when I used to be a lecturer at Sciences Po, I used to tell my students, if there is a problem with Europe, you'll know that Europeans will be divided, and Europeans today are divided. When there are major problems, as the Prime Minister stated before, yes, in the end, we make the final and the right decision, but it's too late and it's not enough. Too late and too little. Customs, for example, taxes for Chinese e-vehicles. 37% from the EU, 100% from the US. Why? Is it because our industry has a better performance? No, it's just that we made a decision, 27 member states, German people, etc. So we really need, to react. We need this boost and this political will. Mr. Prime Minister, you wanted to react. Yes, I wanted to add on what was said before when it comes to the long term. With Trump, it's the long-term vision. In the past, we had Obama, we had bipartisan strategy, etc. But on the other side, I think that there is something exceptional here that we should really highlight. Yes, we have a long-term vision, but when the US are voting with Russia and North Korea against the EU, it's different. It's really different. That's why we really need to invest as much as we can in strategic autonomy. We are going to work towards a more autonomous position with a stronger autonomy, but we need to preserve what we have in common with the US. We shouldn't generalize what is happening today because it's exceptional and what is happening is terrible. Even when it comes to democratic governance, I can see people on TV, for example, CEOs that are next to the president, congratulating Trump for orders and decrees that are passed. Mr. Musk is now buying judges. So I really hope that we still have some values in common. Otherwise, the future will be extremely dire, because what we realize as Europeans is that 3/4 of the world doesn't think like us. And that's true for Americans as well, maybe, and because they have a superior military force, economic force, superior to the one that we have, but still there are limits to that. And I really think that once again we need to strengthen our military, security, economic autonomy, but it's going to take time. But on the other side, we need to be very careful. We really need to preserve our relationship with the US, and we really need to preserve that community of values. I am living at the border, and Canadians and Polish people freed us. And we know that we're talking about 3 to 4 generations ago, so this war is far away. But there was a cycling competition this weekend in my city. There were Canadians, not a lot of them, but they were given a big round of applause because they are very close. People today are very close with Canadians because of our history. So I would like to go back to what the ambassador said. As French people, you need to understand that this is real. This is, what people are feeling. That's the perfect transition for my next question. Ambassador Cohen.
The perfect segue to my question to you. Since you mentioned that the problem that the US or the US administration has currently with Europe is the bottom line, the cost to the US of Europe's security. How is the idea of further European, that we've been discussing here, of further European strategic autonomy met in Washington? Could it, from your perspective, maybe improve relationships between America and Europe?
Well, first, let me just say it's not just defense spending that's the problem. I think if you start with the leaders of tech companies who feel like they've been wronged by the European legal system and whose companies have had to pay very large fines, their influence with the White House is significant. And as the Prime Minister said, they're standing next to the President as he signs executive orders. So that is influencing the direction. The other thing in one of the hats that I'm wearing now, I'm a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. And one of my Atlantic Council colleagues wrote last week, Europe will not be taken seriously by this White House until it develops some key capabilities to take care of its own core national security interests. It's not just the spending, it's the capabilities. And Ambassador Aurore will remember we've been talking for almost 30 years about having European defense that is separable but not separate. There are things that Europe cannot replicate that the United States provides. One of them is the nuclear umbrella. And while there is a nuclear capability in France and in the UK, it can't replace what the American nuclear umbrella brings to Europe as a whole. So to keep that nuclear umbrella in place, you need to have American leadership positions at the table. But I would argue that America will embrace it if Europe develops more of the capabilities so that it can take care of its interests when America doesn't feel like it wants to or needs to, and America can plug in and play when it does. The other thing I would say in general is this isn't like the first Trump administration. This administration has fewer centrists. The Congress, the Republicans in Congress are not driving in the traditional conservative Republican Party mode. They're much more in a transactional led by the White House mode, and that means that you need to focus on specific issues with them, not on a values-based argument, because that's not going to resonate. They are also not going to credit you with value for the last successful transaction. Everyone will be taken on its own merits. That's where we are.
Ambassador Cohen, since you brought up the issue of the large fines imposed to tech companies recently, that's naturally a question for Tariq, of course. Ces amendes, effectivement, qui ont été imposées aux grands groupes.
The fines that have been imposed to the big American giants. Yes, if Europe is powerful, it's first of all a legislation power in the digital field. The Europe has adopted a lot of directives and laws that we're going to talk about then in the days to come. I'm thinking of NIS 2, for example, the AI Act, the DMA, the DSA. It's been severely criticized by the Trump administration. So to you, as an entrepreneur in the tech industry, what do you think about those regulations? Are they necessary for an ethical development of tech in general in Europe? Or is it an obstacle to innovation? Well, I think that we need to regulate, but we also need to become more resilient. So we often say that we have people that will think about where to put, for example, fire extinguishers, but when there is a fire, we have different questions that come in mind. So what is interesting today is that when you talk about regulations, I think there is one that we should have passed, and it's a discussion that I have a lot of times with Mashkrem. If we have to face those problems, if we have different visions on data privacy, it's because we have not been able to create a digital space where Europeans and Americans have the same rights, a space that will protect us against the rest of the world. We haven't been able to have the same understanding. And that's why they win in trials. For regulations, regulating for the sake of regulating is useless. We need innovation divergence. It means that China is going into a new direction. Then we have the US. We talked about tech oligarchs. a bit earlier. So you have the conventional defense industry with Boeing, VS, etc. And then we have the new generation of tech leaders, with Palantir, for example, which are very close to the president and that are saying, okay, the future of warfare is of a digital nature. So we need to win the contracts, we need to work in a startup mode. There are investors saying that the new American paradigm is focusing on that. So there are two fights at the same time. And Europe needs to choose between an ethical environment with ethical AI. And this is interesting. But the problem is that we need to build those spaces and not talk about them solely. The problem is we have the right narrative, we have the right level of powers, we have the population behind us, but we do not develop those products. We're not able to scale up those products. And so it means that we are dependent on products. And it seems that big tech have changed positions, have a different vision. And I think this is where we should work a lot. Thank you very much. A structural question for Augustin de Romanet. In his quest for strategic autonomy, what we are aspiring to achieve, what role can the euro, our currency, play in the face of the power of the dollar, the world's benchmark currency? Do we need a digital euro, a stronger integration in terms of the economic integration? What could enable us to achieve this resilience and economic independence that we would like to reach? There are two questions here. There is a macro question first, the capital market, and a technical question, the digital model. So I'll try and answer both questions. So first of all, when it comes to the euro, it's true that today Europeans and Americans have a lot of spendings in reindustrialization, in the ecological transition. So we need the savings to be guided to Europe. So it's one of the main figures from the Draghi report. We have 300 million euros of European savings that are going to the US. So, 5 to 6 years ago, when I joined the company, I was passionate about the capital market, but at the time nothing seemed to be interested in that. But now, because we're talking about the ecological transition and because we want to reindustrialize the countries, the political leaders have seized this new concept. And so now we have, for example, different topics, organized supervisions, for example, of banking agencies, for example. We also have what we call titrization or securitization, but we have a means to support that for banks to securitize their loans to companies. We also have capitalization funds for retirement. I was in Frankfurt some days ago, and they are terrified by the fact that they don't have any pension funds. eCredit, for example, is buying Commerzbank, and for them it's a tragedy. It's the same situation as when Danone wanted to buy Pepsi, for example, at the time. And financial sovereignty is now under the spotlight in Europe, and I think that the Prime Minister could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that technically it's something that is being taken into account by political leaders, because they know that behind reindustrialization and ecological transition, you also have to tackle the question of the debt. We'll have to get embedded as well, because, for example, Germany decided to remove the obstacles when it comes to the debt, and so the euro could be an instrument for sovereignty, and it's key. The digital euro is something very much different. It's something that the central banks have to deal with to make sure that they are not overwhelmed with cryptocurrencies and the Bitcoin, for example. If us, central banks, do not use digital currencies, we'll be overwhelmed. And then for some times, central banks said that digital currencies could be accessible to the average citizen. For example, you, Mr. Haro, you could have an account in the central bank in digital euro. And it's a tragedy because it's very bad for the banks. So the banking deposits would be directly given to the banks. And so we won't be able to contract a loan thanks to those deposits. So I think that the digital euro could be a good idea to have better relationships between the banks and the central banks, but it's not something that we could use in the general population, contrary to what a lot of people are thinking. It was a bit technical, sorry, but I just wanted to answer your question. We have a few minutes left only before we continue with our last interview for the day. To conclude, could you please answer that following question? Does Europe have the means to establish itself as a true geopolitical power in a world where power dynamics increasingly outweighs law and diplomacy? A good question to finish. Very quickly. No, because I think that the 27 member states have geopolitical visions, interests, and histories that are completely different. When you say the word Russia, it doesn't have the same meaning in Lisbon or in Warsaw. When you're asking different countries in Europe where the threats are coming from, their answers will be completely different. Why? Because a lot of European countries consider that they shouldn't be a power, that power is dirty, and that they are maybe waking up faced with what is happening in Ukraine and in Washington as well. But I think that the EU can be extremely powerful when it comes to cross-cutting issues, climate change, etc. When it comes to geopolitical power, I think that geopolitical power relies on the population, armed forces, and I'm not sure the EU could be a true geopolitical power. Augustin Romanet? I think the opposite. I was expecting this. We're talking about 450 million of consumers. We're talking about 30,000 millions of savings. We're talking about a GDP that is 27 times bigger than the one of India. We're talking about a specific culture. I'll be a bit provocative here because Gérard was provocative. When it comes to diversity and inclusion, for example, of course,
mais évidemment que promouvoir la diversité dans les entreprises, c'est un facteur de progrès.
We know that promoting diversity and inclusion is extremely important. We shouldn't fall into the trap of being extreme, but in Europe we have values. We have very strong values. They are much more older. And so I think that the rebound is possible. And if it doesn't happen, it would be completely disappointing, especially for the young generation that to me is exceptional here. But I will stop here because otherwise I would speak for hours. Your turn, Tarek. Geopolitical power, I don't know, but I think that we are a power when it comes to stability, a stability power. And I think that things are very much fragile. And I think that on the long term, we have the possibility to become a mediator again. I'm not talking about the short term because it looks like everything's going into a lot of diverse directions. But I think that values are important, stability is important. We are not getting used to chaos, and that's true for the US and other parts of the world. And I think that Europe has this capacity. For the digital side, if we can build products that are relying on those values, that are defining those values, I think that we could maybe export those. We didn't talk about culture, and culture is a very strong soft power, and it's going to be extremely important to strengthen the stability. As you said before, we know where we are coming from. We don't know where we're going, but we know where we're coming from, and this is what Europe should be working on. Thank you. Prime Minister, to be completely honest, I'm lost because I'm hopeful, but I'm so fearful. So I agree with you both. I think that there is an opportunity here for Europe. Of course, geopolitics are more and more about force rather than values, but the behavior of Trump and his administration provides us with the monopoly when it comes to diversity, inclusion, the fight for multilateralism, and I think that we will be more attractive. We'll be able to retain the talents, attract new and young talents, so I'm not that pessimistic, but it's true that sometimes I'm a bit fearful. The fact that I'm sorry, I am a European federalist, but the fact that we don't have a European political structure, because there are federations in my country, the fact that the integration is not accompanied with a structure, a political structure, an economic and financial system is something that will prevent us from fulfilling our potential.
And a last question to you, Ambassador Cohen. A different one, of course, given your experience in the field of diplomacy in particular. What's key here to not necessarily repair, but at least make the relationship between the US and Europe currently that is under pressure, that is strained, a little bit better?
Well, I think a lot of it was covered in what I said before. Think about each transaction on its own merits. Think about how the United States views Europe. And you can see in the comments that we're seeing in the public space, they think about Europe not as a collection of 27 countries, but as one. And when you speak with 27 voices, they see you as weak. And the more you can speak with unity, the more effective you'll be in the transactions with the United States. I know it is a challenge, especially when it comes to issues like foreign policy and defense, but that is really where the key lies, I believe. The less you speak with one strong voice, the slower you move on key issues, the more the United States is going to view you as being relegated to the middle power or smaller power space.
Donc une Europe qui parlerait de la même voix.
So a united Europe. So thank you so much for all our panelists for this very interesting discussion. And to conclude, maybe, and to add on what you said, Tariq Karim, you talked about the fact that in Europe we have talents, we know how to innovate, and we need that boost to scale up, and that will be the topic of our discussions tomorrow and the day after. So please stay with us to get answers to that question. Thank you again, Mr. Ambassador Haro. You're going to stay with us for the next panel. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup à tous nos panélistes.
Thank you very much to all our panelists. Thank you for the qualities of these discussions. Mr. Ambassador, please come and take a seat here. We are going to continue this discussion. Thank you.
Monsieur l'ambassadeur, vous restez.
Mr. Ambassador, we're keeping you with us. We are going to continue this discussion. Europe, still on the same theme, Europe under pressure after the re-election of Donald Trump. And to do that, we have the honor of welcoming the CEO of Total Energies, Patrick Pouyanné. Please have a seat.
Patrick Pouyanné, bonjour.
Patrick Pouyanné,
merci d'avoir
accepté notre invitation. Thank you for accepting our invitation and for being with us for INCYBER 2025. We are going to continue on the same conversation, the election of Donald Trump, which opens up a new phase of uncertainty, the era, well, the Trump 2 era. So how do you address this new era, and what are the consequences for the French and also more broadly for the European companies? and also for the American companies. I think it's the same for everybody. It's quite striking. When you go to the US, the election of Donald Trump, there was a big business, a pro-business, pro-energy. We were very enthusiastic. But now the problem is that business leaders have a common point, whether they're American, European, or elsewhere. They have something in common. They don't like uncertainty. They don't like not understanding what's going on. And we see the financial markets reacting extremely negatively, especially the American markets, which react even faster than we do. So there's an algorithm. We don't really understand the algorithm that underlies the trade policies. We, every day it seems like something new is coming out. I think it's not just the Europeans. I think our American colleagues are also a little bit lost, and American investments as well. Market is dropping, so it's not so great maybe for business, I don't know. So let's not add more chaos to the chaos. On the contrary, I believe we need to stay calm. We know how to run our businesses, we know how they work, and right now it's quite complicated to draw any conclusions from what's happening because we don't know what's going to happen. So the point with possibilities for changes that are quite frequent, quite likely. So we don't know what's going to happen. Well, the US were doing quite well. In fact, they were doing quite well. And now we're talking about an economic downturn or maybe a recession. We are, of course, our company Total is very strong in the US with liquefied gas. And we also work on renewable energies. And I explained this to the Trump administration. And in Texas, we invited our investors on a field trip to look at renewable energies. So we need to continue what we know how to do. They need electricity. And it's not because there's a watchword saying wind farms are bad that we have to stop, because we need energies. So I think it's a good idea for us to keep our heading, to keep our direction, and we'll see if we need to adapt anything based on the actual decisions that come out that can take time. And I think there might be some changes in the near future. Mr. Ambassador, as we said, you're the former French ambassador to the UN, and you were starting to talk about this in the previous roundtable, this transatlantic relationship. You talked about trauma, sentimental attachment. How do you see the future of multilateralism? First and foremost, I would really like to say that I observed during the first Trump administration, I fully agree with Mr. Pouyanné. Before we rush to comment or react to what Donald Trump may have said, I think we should wait, because I don't know of any statement of Donald Trump's that has not been contradicted, changed, amendment, or forgotten the next day. So, in Paris at the time, I would say before we react, let's wait to see what's going to happen. In addition, all the Americans say this today. As Mr. Pouyanné said, they say what Donald Trump is going to decide to change or not change policy, what will push him to change his policy or not will depend on the stock exchange. So there's been a significant drop at the stock exchange. If there's a big problem with the stock exchange, that may lead Donald Trump to ask himself some questions that he's not asking himself right now. Multilateralism is a different topic. I don't know if you noticed, but during the previous roundtable, I always try to replace the discussion in the long term. Multilateralism today is the word that doesn't necessarily come to mind when you look at the international stage. On the contrary, it's the return of the powers, the empires, the relationship based on opposition of strength and force. So, and this is expressed very often in a manner that increases divisions. For example, sanctions, the multiplication of sanctions in all directions. That has consequences with economic fragmentation of the world. You see that with secondary sanctions. The confrontation between China and the US is currently expressed through trade restrictions. For example, advanced microprocessors, the fact that the Americans have banned exporting of advanced microprocessors to China. So you can see a fragmentation. And something that's also very important is that our citizens are asking for fragmentation. Our citizens are asking for borders, are asking for protection. So I am convinced that whether it's Trump or not Trump, and we saw this even with Biden, is that protectionism is back. Protectionism to protect our economies for reindustrialization, but also borders. We see these issues at the heart of all the political discussions in all Western democracies, or almost. So the issue of immigration, for example. So I'm not going to call this a multilateral approach. Multilateral approaches are blocked. The United Nations are blocked. The Security Council is blocked by the rivalry among the big nations. And at a time when the Western world sees its relative influence decreasing on the world stage, we have many countries saying that these multilateral institutions are dominated by the Western world. So perhaps to say, for example, well, India is not a permanent member of the Security Council, there's no African permanent member or Latin American permanent member. And when you look at the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank, they are managed by Europeans and Americans. So there's a multilateral system which is challenged by the economic and political questions of the day and disputed by many countries in the world. Mr. Pouyanné, the energy sector is really at the heart of the current transformations, whether they're geopolitical, economic, or technological. We'll talk about that later. According to you, what are the main threats today against the major energy companies like Total Energies? Well, I'm going to say dogmatism on the one hand and a short-term approach on the other hand. Dogmatism is expressed in both directions. Dogmatism is denying that there's no climate change, well, denying climate change. So, of course, we have to progress towards decarbonated energy. But dogmatism is also the other side, saying that, well, people are using climate change to destroy capitalism. So people are going to have an anti-fossil campaign, which is the opposite of what consumers want and the reality of our world is. The reality of our world is because the 6 or 7 billion inhabitants of the planet who are not in our Western countries, they want more energy. They want growth, whether we like it or not. So we're not going to impose our vision saying, well, because we developed, well, you must carry on being less developed or consuming less and growing less and consuming less energy because there's the problem of climate change. That does not work at all. In fact, it antagonizes them. And it's a real issue. And I've seen this many times at conferences of parties of the Global South in particular. You know, we have to be pragmatic when we talk about energy. We need common sense. But even in Europe, you know, people want energy which is reliable, constantly available, sustainable, but they want it to be cheap above all, first and foremost. You've seen the crises we had when in 2022 energy prices rose. It's an essential good, and we have to be able to deliver low-cost, cheap energy. Then the short-term attitude is also a problem. Energy is long-term. We invest in projects for 10, 15, or 20 years from now. But as I said 2 weeks ago in Houston to the Americans, when all of a sudden we think it's good to get rid of all the regulations on methane emissions in the US, that's not a good idea, because industrialists have worked on this issue and we want a level playing field, and we know the topic's going to come back 4 years from now. It's a short-term attitude. We shouldn't be following this. We run an energy company. We need to have a strategy. We produce oil and gas because that's what our consumers want today, and if I stop producing, then prices are going to go up, and that's not what our consumers want. But at the same time, we've decided to provide electricity. Total Energy is now providing energy in 2024, 2025, so we have a strategy for electricity as well. And we're not going to change our strategy, you know, all the time. In fact, the watchword, if you want to succeed, we need to be pragmatic. We need to stop thinking by telling people what to do, you will only have electric vehicles, or you will do this, or you will do that. We cannot steer consumption. We have to carry on working to innovate, to reduce costs, and once the costs are reduced, then we can convince consumers to adopt these new energies. But we will not succeed just with regulation, telling people what to do. And we'll very soon have the problem in Europe with the electric vehicle, because they will only adopt it in Europe if it's cheap. That's the only reality. 10,000 euros more than the price of another car, no one else is going to adopt it. Or it will become a vehicle for rich people in town. Which is what's happening almost now, but that's not a transition. So we need to be pragmatic, step by step. But on the other hand, of course, we don't want to go back in time. We mustn't throw out the baby with the bathwater, because these technologies are evolving. This morning we were talking about battery technologies. In 1 year, we have gained 35% on the cost of a battery for solar farms, minus 35%. So things are happening. We're working a lot, and we need to believe in this transition. But it will be steered by technological innovation, and not because someone somewhere has decided that tomorrow morning everybody has to do this or that. That is all. So we'll continue to move forward with common sense and a pragmatic approach. We are at the beginning of major technological revolutions. We're going to talk about them during this forum. The rise of artificial intelligence, quantum, cloud computing, edge computing, many technical evolutions. How do you view these evolutions, and what are the traps, the pitfalls that we should be avoiding to ensure that these technologies continue to be levers for growth, but also for sovereignty in Europe? I think that these are evolutions that we will derive a benefit from. The internet revolution, I don't know how it worked without the internet before. I was the chief of staff for a minister who became prime minister. We adopted all of this technology, and we don't remember how we worked before. So these technological evolutions and revolutions even are developed by human beings for the benefit of human beings. When we talk about artificial intelligence, it's not to reduce costs. I don't see that as the main interest. It's to increase our income, our revenue. It's because we can get our refineries to work better, we can develop better models from our solar and wind farms, thanks to all the data that we have accumulated. There's also weather forecasting, for example. When you have wind farms, weather forecasting is absolutely essential, for example. So I think we need to think this at the European level in that area. My real problem today in this area of digital artificial intelligence is that we don't have a European champion. It's a real problem for companies like ours. When I have to choose a cloud and I choose between Amazon, Microsoft or Google, I'm not very happy to put all my data in all of that. We've chosen a hybrid choice where part of the data stay in proprietary cloud. And so I would like us to have a European cloud. To have a European cloud, there's only one solution. We need to have a real European Union for digital, a single European legislator for 27 countries, single European regulator and legislator. To talk about the sovereignty of France is pointless. If we try to do this just in France, no company will adopt it. We know that at this scale we will not have the best technologies on the cloud. If we had a Europe-wide company built at the scale of the European market of almost 500 million people, we could have confidence in that. So I think it's urgent, sovereignty. If we only think country by country in Europe, I can tell you we're all small. We're all small. Facing the Chinese bloc and the American bloc, we're going to have a lot of trouble. I know people can tell you that's not what European people want, but I can tell you maybe the contrary. I'm not sure I agree with that. What I see in my line of work is that we have to think the real solution for us is more Europe. It's true for capitals, energy and digital. That's the way to make progress, a powerful, a strong Europe. Let's stop being naive. There's no multilateralism. Today we're building a world, the Americans are coming back. The world is coming back to powers. And we will not be able to do that with 27 of us separately. That's not going to work. We have to be sovereign and sovereign together and strong together. And we'll do that if we complete the market union. We always talk about it, but we don't do it. I see, Mr. Ambassador, that you agree on this? Yes, my apologies. I fully agree with the idea. Well, in the previous roundtable, I was asked, well, do you believe in geopolitical Europe? And I said no. And the reason I said, well, when we talk about geopolitics, we talk about military, well, traditional military strength and weapons and ships and so on. But there are areas in which clearly we have to work at the European scale, the European level. Mr. Pouyanné was referring to the digital market, but we could also talk about financial markets, really, because when I was ambassador in Washington, I saw these young French people who generally had been to a school of engineering or something like that, and who had a product, or who thought they had a product, with another friend that in a garage, you know, and then it worked in Europe. And there was a time when they had to cross the Atlantic and go to the US, and they had to go to the US for two fundamental reasons. The first was the size of the American market. Quite simply, there was a big market, and they said, well, in Europe it's not the same thing. There are different markets. In the US, there is a stable market with a sound and solid legal system. And of course, the second one is the issue of funding. There's also the problem of funding, the differences between financing in European countries with the means and resources of European countries, and a lot of wasting. Well, Slovenia has its own system, Estonia has its own system, of course. You don't have the combined power of a market of 450 million people, a rich market. So, in a certain way, today, of course, we need more Europe. Of course, we need more Europe, but in areas which are not necessarily the areas that people think about. In particular, the digital. And the question of the European cloud is obvious. It's an obvious, but we've tried. We've tried. No, we haven't tried. But there have been initiatives, but they were national initiatives, and you have regulation country by country. If we talk about cybersecurity, we have the NIS2 directive for cybersecurity on electrical networks. There's an equivalent, it's called NERC in the US. We invest in renewable energies and electricity in the US. It's very easy to integrate. In Europe today, the 27 countries must translate the European directive, and 27 regulations will be different. I produce renewable energies in 27 countries. I have to make the effort 27 times. If I had a single European regulator to express this pragmatically for everyone, I don't see why the system is so different in Europe, in France, in Spain. If we could have one regulator for everyone, we would make giant leaps. We cannot emerge. The strength, where you see where all the AI giants are, well, they're in China and the US, because they manage the data of very large markets for over 1 billion people for one, or 400 million for the other. And in Europe, we can't do that because everyone has different rules. We can keep sovereignty in military and defense matters, but we can only do it if we work together, and we'll have to continue. And this is a real concern in light of the importance of the industrial revolution of the future. Because if we continue like this, we are going to depend on others. You know, the Blue Initiative, the French cloud is Microsoft at the end of the day. So let's see, you know, if there's going to be a crisis. The decision I have made in my company, against the opinion of many of my colleagues, because they wanted to go into the cloud to exchange data, but we spend $1 billion to buy geophysical and earthquake-related seismic data throughout the world. So I said, these data, the most sensitive data, you're going to keep them separate, because I'm not going to give them to others. I mean, we're economic competitors. If I had a European cloud, I think that I would have, I wouldn't be afraid to share that information. It's very concrete. I don't see how we can address this 21st century with this essential technology by continuing to think that each of us in their own corner can continue to do what they're doing, so we can have a choice between Chinese tools and American tools. Well, I know where I'll go, but come on, you know, that's not satisfactory at a time that we're talking about sovereignty and we talk about the concept if we're not implementing it on topics that are so important. My explanation of this contradiction is also coming back to the idea that for most Europeans, depending on the Americans was something that was, well, you know, it was logical and normal. And on the contrary, they did not want to be separated from the Americans. There was sort of a vision, and we belong to this global world, the global Western world. I remember a negotiation once where we were launching the Galileo project. It was supposed to be a European geopositioning system, and it was at the very beginning, and we, the French, were the only ones who wanted a protected signal on Galileo. The others did not want it because they said, we have GPS, it's fine. And a young French diplomat, I sent him to negotiate, and he said with me and asked, why do you want a protected signal? And he said, well, that way we will not depend on the American GPS. And the Dutch guy sitting opposite him, that's precisely why we don't want a protected signal. We do not want to be separated from the Americans. So there is this notion of, well, the political notion, and we can hope that the Europeans will realize what is happening and will wake up on this issue like on other issues. We can talk about the ETAR legislation concerning arms regulations. We can talk about strategic autonomy. It's not just you know, fantasy of you know, Gaullist French people. It is a need, but it requires an effort, and it requires a financial effort and also a long-term effort. Yes, but I think that from that viewpoint, President Trump is maybe going to help us. There's been a major event with the position of the new German Chancellor. It's huge what happened the evening of the election, where Germany, since 1945, was entirely aligned. And now the German Chancellor said we have to think of ourselves without the United States. We have to rethink ourselves. So maybe Donald Trump has initiated something. You know, when Obama did not follow us in Syria, then, you know, there are trends, and we have to accept these trends. The French historically were always considered as being more sovereignist, more with a more Gaullist approach, but other countries are realizing that we have to take charge of ourselves. From that viewpoint, I think he's helping us wake up and take charge of ourselves. So it would be an opportunity. I choose to see it as an opportunity, yes. Europe has imposed itself over the last few years as a regulatory power. We've seen many ambitious texts, the GDPR, the AI Act, NIS2. These are texts that defend a vision, a value in Europe, but some consider that it could slow down innovation because with other parts of the world that will be less regulated than we are. So how do we work with this? Do we continue along those lines? What do we do? Or should we change our model to remain competitive? I'm European, but in this case, I'm not European. I don't understand how we can talk of regulating something we don't know yet. We're just at the beginning of huge innovative steps. And here we're already talking about the precautionary principle, fear. Precaution is the worst thing we can think about. Instead of, I'd rather talk about principle of innovation rather than the principle of precaution. I think we have to stop being afraid. I did an experiment in our company. I said that Copilot would be given to 30,000 executives in the company. 61% have adopted it as a useful tool. So I think we need to consider this as a huge opportunity opportunity and stop being afraid. Of course, on personal data, we have to control the use that is made of our personal data, but I'm not sure that the CNIL model is the best model for Europe and at the global level. And we are opposing the US. What is happening with our artificial intelligence startups? What's happening? Well, they're going to the US. They are going to the US. Is that what we want? We must ask ourselves questions. I had dinner this week with about 10 next 40 companies. They're all going off to the US for capital reasons, but also for regulation reasons. It's just easier to act in the US. I think we must stop scaring people. We have time to regulate. I think it's incredible that we're starting regulation without even identifying what it is we actually want. The problem here is that it's a psychological problem. We're not saying that we want to innovate. We need to trust companies and entrepreneurs before we start saying that we're going to regulate everything. And that's what I try to do in my own business. So that's why we need cybersecurity, because cybersecurity is what's going to give you trust, a trust framework. Well, within that, let's go, let's act, let's be innovative.
So I will not react as an ambassador because it goes out of my comfort zone. I used to be an engineer a long time ago, but to me, when you are faced with such a technological revolution, such as AI, when you see extraordinary advancements it can lead to that are also rapid and unpredictable, the first goal is not to regulate. We can, for example, gather experts and engineers that will enable us to understand what is going on and to also raise the alarm. There is something happening, we need to be very cautious. But today, I'm trying to follow what's going on in the field of AI, but it's too hard for me. So please understand our political authorities. They are completely overwhelmed, and that's normal. They are overwhelmed because it's so technical, because it evolves so fast. So our MPs decided yet to regulate, and to me it's a logical problem, you know. Maybe we are regulating because we no longer innovate, we're not in the technological race, so what we want to do is to create frameworks because we don't do anything else. I think that, once again, I am an ambassador, and so I am a specialist when it comes to behavior, and I think that the problem is that we don't want to take risks. And risks are not perceived in the same way in Europe and in the US. For example, in the US, the risk is well perceived, and you are taking risk. And if you fail, it's not the end of the world. You'll be told, okay, what did you do? What didn't work? Try again. Maybe change something that will enable you to succeed. But in France, taking risks is not a positive thing. And it's the same with progress. We're talking about progress here, which is quite simple. The problem is that today we have a strong debate around progress. We no longer believe in progress, and so it's as if we should, you know, work on our own. We need progress to be compatible with sustainable development. Human beings want to make progress, they want to develop, it's part of their DNA. And I think today there is something that is broken here. You talked about trust before. This is the main topic of this INCYBER 2025 forum, trust. But it looks like we are facing a trust crisis for companies, for institutions, for people. This is what we can see in all of surveys. So what are the levers that we can use to strengthen that trust? It's a philosophical question, I think. But to me, the key is to be brave. We need to be brave enough to face the reality of things, and to be brave, we need to have a vision, because to me it goes hand in hand. We have a lack of trust because we have a lack of a collective vision. We don't know where we're going to go together. And so we need, unfortunately, to face the chaos created by Putin, the chaos created by Trump, the attacks by Putin. We need to have a collective vision. And if we do, we'll be brave enough to move forward together. This is how I created my company. We have created our vision where we wanted to be in 2030, 2035. And then we make actions, we take actions, we make decisions. This is what gives you the courage to go there. Collective vision. And to me, it is essential. And despite what you just said, I think that citizens and surveys have shown that citizens trust companies more, and something that we see in all surveys, and I think we should listen to the companies more. I'm stunned because I've seen a lot of regulations being taken without us being consulted. We have fake consultations, but they are not enough. For cybersecurity, there are lots of things happening within companies. If we were listened to, if they would let us do what we want to do, we would change things, and it's what is done in the US. We create the rules because we are afraid of the big companies. We are afraid, and that's a big mistake that we are making here. I think we should have confidence in companies, in entrepreneurs that know where to go and how to get there. I'm going to leave the European framework. I'm going to talk about France. French people need to know where they're going. They need to know where their country is going. They need to know what is the objective, what the country has in mind. We can't simply tell them, go there together. We need to know where we're going. We need to tell the French people, we need the authorities, need to tell the French people the feeling that our country is going into a certain direction, because the role of the leader is to give a direction. I will remember for a very long time some professional experience in a site in Moselle. They had a lot of difficulties, but the company was doing well, and so they didn't want to restructure the company, even though it was necessary. And there was a trade union leader that told me, we don't know you, but we want you to make decisions, because the fact that you're not making any is creating a lot of uncertainty. They don't know, for example, if our colleagues will be able to buy a house tomorrow, so their future is uncertain. So we want you to tell us where we're going. Maybe the decision will be to stop this unit, but we need to be aware of what is going to happen. And I'm telling you this because the person who was in front of me knew about the difficulties, and I think the French people know what are the difficulties, so we shouldn't talk to them as if they were children. They know what is going on. But leaders need to tell them what we're doing and why. But we can't say something and then the opposite. It doesn't work. And for a company, it's exactly what's going on. I've been through the pandemic. Everything stopped overnight. It was chaos. But at some point, I had to say, okay, here is what we're going to do. This is the first priority, this is the second priority. And then everyone was able to know what to do, to be reassured, and to just do what they were asked to do. And that's the role, the deep role of a leader. We are reaching the end of the discussion. I would like to thank you warmly for participating in that debate, and I think we can give them a big round of applause. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to both of you.